Very pleased today to be joined by Rory Cockshaw.
Hello there.
Yeah, cheers, Rory, for coming on. And yeah, we're going to be pouring over some documentation today from a big ag website that Rory has come across. That's kind of taught. It's UK relevant, but is relevant to everywhere. Okay, so it is a UK website that we're going to be going over. It's UK Big Ag. But it will be relevant, I think, to you wherever you are, because I think it's very important for sort of the animal farming industry that they know the tactics that they're up against, and they know the tactics that they need to push themselves and how organised they need to be with that. So even though it's a UK website, it should be relevant to wherever you are. I know probably most of my audience actually isn't from the UK, so that's absolutely fine. But this should hopefully be an interesting stream for you. To see what they're speaking about, what they're up to, and the massive amounts of insights. Like, you wouldn't believe the amount of work and insight that goes into selling their product, propagandizing their product, and covering up the bad stuff and all that. So it's going to be good to get into that today. So Rory, before we start going over this website, did you just want to tell the audience like about yourself and your sort of role in the animal rights movement and what you do?
Sure, yeah, very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, of course, I'm Rory. I've worked in a few different places, worn a few different hats. Started off as a campaigner at Viva, the vegan charity, and now I work kind of dual wielding, I guess, growth manager at Omni. We make plant-based dog food, and I also work as the podcast manager for Animal Rising. Animal Rising, of course, being a big activism organisation here in the UK. Yeah, not to plug, but do check out the podcast. New episode just launched 2 hours ago.
Oh, who's the new episode with?
New episodes with Rob Percival. He's a guy who he wrote a book called The Meat Paradox. And that guy, yeah, and he's the head of policy at the Soil Association. So he's kind of on the on the plant-based spectrum, very interested in veganism. Not actually sure if he's vegan. I didn't ask the question directly, but he's
Rory, come on,
agroecology.
you're meant to put him in the hot seat on the podcast.
I am.
You
Well,
can't...
that's. I'm afraid that's not our style on the Animal Rising podcast. It's
All right.
Yeah.
It's my style here, so I'm going to put you in the hot seat for this live stream today. Right.
Sweats nervously.
So let's take a look at this website now then. So we'll just give people a brief overview of what it's about. Let me just present my screen now. So, right, hopefully everyone can see that. AHDB. Now, what does that stand for? It stands for the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board. Now, what they do is they're basically a lobbying group where sort of farmers across the UK can all join and get everything that they want, I guess, backed by strong kind of data. And its intention is ultimately to drive the sales of UK animal products. So that's why they exist. So they're on top of kind of everything. They're probably aware that we're streaming about them right now. I don't know. So yeah, they're one of those groups that is just on it when it comes to UK animal agriculture. Like when you think about big ag, this is what it is basically. So we're going to
work incredibly closely with people like the NFU, for example, the National Farmers Union, and they're one of those. They're one of those organisations that have an incredibly boring name, but do a hell of a lot, and so they crop up time and time again in kind of the animal agriculture world. They just got fingers in every meaty pie they can imagine. So yeah, they're promiscuous to say the least.
So we'll take a quick look now at one of their campaigns. So it's called the We Eat Balanced campaign. Now, if you're in the UK, you might be aware of that. Let me just get that up on my screen right now. We Eat Balanced. And then we'll show you a little. Rory's made me aware of a little video they're doing as well. So this is the We Eat Balanced campaign. So I guess we'll start analysing here, Rory. What is the We Eat Balanced campaign? I think you know a little bit more about it than me. Can you give people a brief overview of what they've been doing with this campaign?
Sure. So as we'll see in the reports later, I know your channel isn't focused on kind of environment and health stuff particularly, and I'm obviously an ethical vegan as well. So this is this is an attempt by them to sway those people who are kind of on the fence, like the people who are thinking about meat maybe a little bit, the unconscious and conscious reducers.
Yeah.
So the flexitarians who, we kind of disparage and they equally disparage, but for very different reasons. And they're trying to reach these people to prevent them from moving away from meat, because obviously the tide is turning to at least some degree. There's an explosion in the plant-based stuff. Vegan is on the tip of everybody's tongue. There's so many media articles about these darned vegans, and they're basically scared that veganism is going to take over.
Right.
And we will. But the We Eat Balanced campaign is a campaign by them to embed this idea that eating balanced is synonymous with eating animal products. And so we'll see that in the video, and you'll see it in the campaign page. They've got these 3 tenets: it's health, sustainability, welfare.
Right.
But they're really focusing on that health. And notice they immediately mention vitamin B12. That'll be relevant later when we look at their marketing strategies, where vitamin B12 is the hero. But we see in the video as well the little subtitles they've got on the video, the kind of descriptions at different points, are essentially conflating eating animal products with eating balanced, again, in order to not reach vegans, not convince vegans, but to convince the people who are on the fence maybe one day they'll be vegans.
Okay.
That's what they're doing.
Should we check out the video then for this campaign?
I feel like we should.
Right. Let's share this one. Okay. Can you see that on your screen now, Rory?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
The video? Okay, cool. Let me just adjust the volume, because I think what happens is the volume on these plays a bit louder than we speak when we do a thing. All right, let's check. I haven't seen this video, so let's check this out.
There's lots of goodness in there. And there.
How does the goodness get in? Is it in the air? Or the rain? Or in what they eat?
All in very nice outdoor friendly environment. Like vitamin B12.
Of course.
B12, which helps us get energy from food and stay healthy.
Wow. Meat and dairy. Enjoy the goodness.
Can you imagine anything more ethics washing than that video?
I mean, the funny thing is as well, just to show what a kind of lobbying group this is, it doesn't even promote a product. It just says meat and dairy, enjoy the goodness, which is kind of proving the point about what you said earlier about how scared they're kind of getting. It's like, oh crap, we need to just specifically mention, we're so scared now, we're not even going to just promote a certain brand. It's just about protecting all of the brands, essentially. So that's what this group is about. And tell us.
Just to point out on that as well, it goes to show how strong the meat and dairy, the animal agriculture lobby is, compared to, for example, like a plant-based meat alternative lobby. Like, there is no such thing really as the plant-based meat alternative lobby, except for me and you, just kind of grassroots activists who go out and chat to people in the street and do some bits and bobs and do some live streams and podcasts. Like, we are the lobby, and what we're up against is the AHDB, who have millions upon millions and have vast wealth of resources, who are going out with campaigns and videos like this, and all we have is a handful of activists and charities and grassroots stuff. Like, it's the tide is the balance is not in our favor. We'll get there, but that's kind of what we're up against, is somebody who's just an umbrella, protect the industry at all costs, whereas the fruit and veg and beyond meat, it's got nothing like the same.
Well, that is where you're wrong, you see, Rory, because did you not know that we are the New World Order, Agenda 21 or whatever it is, and it's actually Bill Gates that is controlling me and you. So just for anyone wondering who's joined the stream now, me and Rory are actually just mouthpieces for Bill Gates. We're paid billions of dollars a year to be shills for the plant-based meat industry. So and that's why me and Rory are just like stinking rich, just rolling in money. And, we don't really care about veganism. It's just a depopulation agenda. Anyway, but in all seriousness, I think that is very telling. That there's no big chickpea, so to speak. There's no big potato, whatever. This is about animal farmers now sort of in bed with each other. Did we want to add anything more about that, Rory, or should we go straight into the kind of document that's talking about the insights and all that kind of stuff, what we're seeing on the shelves, the improving shopper engagement with the meat aisle? Did we want to go into that?
Yeah, let's go into the consumer insights because that will help us to dissect basically what we saw in that video. Because that video is basically all of their marketing insights and data they've got from these kind of studies that they've done, just rolled up into a nice, friendly, 1 minute, 30-second, whatever it is, package. So let's
Okay.
go into the insights.
Absolutely. Now, I just want to make everyone aware that you can access this website. So it's called ahdb.org.uk, and there's tons there. There's a lot on the website, but Rory and I are just going to go over ultimately what's a small segment of the website today with the few sort of documents and stuff that we're going to go over. So let's have a look at this one then. So this is improving shopper engagement with the meat aisle. So I'll just read out the opening here and we'll sort of say what this document is about. So it says, it's paramount that the in-store environment for meat is improved. The category is hugely valuable, accounting for 14% of grocery spend, and is purchased by 99% of households in Britain. That is interesting. So that means we've still got a lot of work to do, guys. If
and
we
it about
wanna...
accords with the stat that about 1 or 2% at most of Britain is vegan. So like 1% of those households are obviously not going to purchase meat, fish, dairy, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's very small, vanishingly small.
It says, despite the booming online market in recent years, physical stores still account for 87% of meat and poultry sales. However, previous research from AHDB has highlighted a real challenge with the in-store environment, with only a small proportion of shoppers actually enjoying shopping in the meat aisle. So I don't know what they mean by this, enjoying. But I guess what's happening is they're talking about relative to before, perhaps. Perhaps they're just finding that more people are kind of turned off going down the meat aisle. I'm not sure.
So what it is they did a it says in the methodology in the kind of appendix to the whole paper.
Right.
They did a online questionnaire, I think, with 1,000 people with obviously a whole bunch of different questions. And I think one of them was literally just, do you enjoy shopping in the meat aisle? Kind of, or to what extent do you agree that?
Right.
And yeah, and so obviously it's yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let me see if there's anything interesting in this opening bit.
The thing that I thought was interesting, sorry to cut you off, was
Yeah.
Losses stemmed from those who weren't even making a conscious decision to move away from the category. Now that's quite a interesting little tidbit that we have, like the flexitarians and the vegetarians and the vegans and the pescatarians and all the itarians that aren't actually vegans, but people aren't actually thinking about moving away consciously. They just kind of are doing so because society is just shifting slightly. That for me is quite an important fact.
Yeah, and it says here, I don't know if does it show it when I highlight on my screen share there? Is it showing that or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Evidence indicated that a lack of inspiration in store was a key influence. So this is an influence in people moving away from the meat aisle, the morgue. So it might be, as you say, yeah, that it's not the case that they're finding it ethically unappealing. It's that they're finding that there's just no pizzazz about meat anymore. It's just kind of meat and that's it. It's not got perhaps this wow factor that maybe it did have back in the day, maybe because of the explosion of all these options we have now in store. I'm not sure. So let's go over these key findings. The theme of inspiration is a standout in attracting people into the aisle. Utilize this to get shoppers thinking about their meal rather than the product.
What they mean by inspiration there, just to add as well, inspiration is typically recipe ideas. That's what they're talking about. So further down, we'll see that they have like these mock-ups of aisles where which are kind of designed to optimize inspiration. And it's like, scan this QR code to get healthy recipe ideas and all this kind of stuff, and showing pictures of what you can do with meat. And so it's really like, and you see this if you go into somewhere like, M&S or wherever, you have loads of pictures of kind of recipes on the panels around the aisle. That's what they're talking about when they say inspiration.
Okay. And the next bullet point says, at shelf, use a range of messaging. This for anyone's wondering what it's talking about here, it's saying to meat companies to do this. So this is like speaking to you as if you're a meat, a sausage company or something. At shelf, use a range of messaging themes to reassure shoppers of concerns regarding farming and health. Statements highlighting British farming expertise appeal.
Yep.
Next, this is probably one of the most interesting bits of the points. And this is something we've got to be aware as vegans. We need to all know how to refute this kind of argument that we get. So, health has a role to play on pack, acting as that final reassurance. Vitamin B12 should be the hero, supported by broader health messaging. Now, this is all research backed, can I just say? You'll see how much research has gone into this in the document. So when it says this, they're not just throwing it out there to be like, oh, maybe let's say that B12 because what the hey. They've put research into this to say that people are it's appealing to eat animal products because of the idea that it has B12 for energy, whatever, which is what we just saw in that video a moment ago. So that is, I'll tell you what, Rory, I'll put you, as I said, in the hot seat. So how do you respond when non-vegans say to you, but Rory, your diet doesn't contain any B12, whereas if I eat meat, I get a natural source of B12.
Because, well, it would be that cows and sheep don't have a natural source of B12 in their diet either. The only way that any of us get B12 is through supplementation, and that's vegans and non-vegans.
Right.
Because predominantly cows, pigs, sheep, all the animals that we, not you and I, but we commonly eat as a society, they are supplemented B12 because we've destroyed soils to such an extent that the bacteria that produce B12 no longer exist. And so obviously when cows, pigs, sheep, etc. graze on grass, they are going to pick up a certain amount of soil, pick up this bacteria, it's going to populate their gut microbiota and produce B12 for them. So it's not an endogenous synthesis, it's an exogenous synthesis of B12 from bacteria that they aren't kind of born with. So because of that, because of the destruction of soils and the degradation of the natural landscape, cows, pigs, sheep, and so on don't actually have their own B12 source within their bodies. They're just given it by farmers. And so then you have a choice. Well, do I get B12 from, supplements given to animals, which are then brutally murdered, and I eat them? Or do I just take the supplement myself? Those are your two choices. There aren't really any other choices, practically speaking. There's also, even if you couldn't get a natural source of B12, and even if cows, pigs, and sheep did have B12, it's like, well, if there was a human being who you had a choice, either A, you can kill that human being and digest their B12, or B, you can just take some artificial B12 yourself. Well, obviously, you just take some yourself because you want to avoid killing, and the moral imperative to avoid murder is stronger than whatever the potential nutritional imperative could be to get a natural source of B12, which is chemically identical to an artificial source of B12. That's a longer answer than I actually give in person, but
that's absolutely fine. And I think UK soil is depleted of cobalt, isn't it? Which is where the essentially what B12 is derived from, if I'm not mistaken. So I believe that. So that's what's happening, and also even in areas of grassland where there still is cobalt, well, animals don't tend to populate those areas anyway, because most farmed animals are kept indoors. Most farmed animals are factory farmed. You obviously won't notice that they, push this at all, obviously. So next bit. In store, shoppers navigate the meat aisle by product, assessing product quality and reiterating the importance of taste and appearance. Packaging design should be elevated without compromising the visibility of the product itself. Do you know what it means by that, Rory? I think I'm a bit confused by this.
So what they're saying there is when you package let's imagine again that we are a sausage company. What we ought to do is package in such a way that you can actually see the sausages themselves. Like you need to see the product and not just cover it with labels and stuff. They want to see that it's primarily that it's like an authentic, real juicy thing, like part of an animal. Which is curious to me when I read that, because at the same time we have this kind of psychological drive to distance ourselves from the products that we eat as omnivores. Obviously I'm not an omnivore. But omnivores have this kind of, they can't eat like fish if the eyes are still on it or anything like that. So it is a bit curious. Obviously looking at a sausage, you can't tell immediately that it's from an animal because it's just a tube of meat. But Yeah, but there's this thing where you need to be able to actually see the product because you make quality judgments based on actually viewing the sausages themselves.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's still, these things are still ultimately abstractions, right? It's like you said, yeah, the fish like with the eye still on them, or whatever, and people wouldn't like to see in most countries, like at least in most Western countries, like a pig's head, like with the eyes still on them or whatever.
Yeah.
Especially in the store. I know people get drunk and go to these hog roast things and stuff like that, but I think there's a difference between seeing that and then seeing it would look very weird on a shelf. So even though you're seeing the flesh of this animal in the packaging, there's still that separation of yourself from who that animal actually was. You're just seeing these little cylinders in a plastic shrink wrap. Ultimately, you're not seeing the animal themselves. Ultimately,
That brings me on to, just as a side note, my favourite word in the entire world is botuliform, which means sausage shaped. I just want to throw that in there. Like, it's a fantastic word, botuliform. Just for all the viewers.
I'll have to make sure to incorporate that into my outreach. Thank you, Rory. So the next bullet point: utilize point of sale POS that disrupts at the point of purchase, with space savers and large shelf strips holding a strong appeal. Aisle fins have an important role to play to attract people into the aisle. So aisle fins are those like little plastic things that kind of stick out on the supermarket aisle. So they say that their research shows that is becoming important now to get people to eat meat. Anything else you wanted to say on that bullet point, Rory?
Yeah, I'd added that it sounds on face value like a boring point. And it's kind of true, it's just like supermarket design, I guess.
Yep.
If you scroll down to page 3, you can see at the bottom of that page there's some essentially designs of what these aisles might look like, and they've got a few different options as you go down. These are just the first ones that they present you with, and this kind of illustrates the point of, if you go into somewhere and the red meat aisle looks like it does in the bottom right, where things are just labelled as it's like pork, beef, all that kind of stuff. It's boring as hell, and you're not going to want to shop there. Again, assuming the mindset of just some average carnist omnivore type.
Yeah.
Whereas if you decorate it with these kind of aisle fins and all the designs, and if you actually go to supermarkets, you'll see them look like this, because they take on the advice of the AHDB. And you can see there's inspiration, health, and farming. Now, inspiration, again, that's kind of the recipe ideas. Health is, obviously, as it says on the tin, your health is B12 emphasis, particularly in protein and vitamins. And the farming one is like back British farming, essentially. So that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about things like have lots of aisle fins. It's like that's actually what supermarkets look like, and that's how you get people to engage in them. So that's how I'd illustrate that point there.
What is it meaning here on this page when it says like inspiration and gives a percentage? Is that saying they use the those black fins to like inspire recipe ideas, and then for health it needs to look like this or something like that, or am I getting confused about what?
So actually, it's interesting you brought up the black background, because we'll come on to that in a second. But at the bottom, you can see it says, looking at these aisles, which would you be most likely to want to go down to browse and buy red meat? So that's the percentage answer. So these percentages, I think, do they add up to? Yeah, they add up to 100.
Yeah.
So 11% of people would be most enticed by just the plain, boring aisle. I don't know who those people are. 28% would be most enticed by an aisle that kind of highlights farming, lots of pictures of the outdoors. And
I see. Okay. Yeah.
25% by health, and 35% by basically recipe inspiration. And just to point to the black background, particularly that you pointed out, that is because, as we see further down, they found that when you have images of food on a black background, that makes, especially like meat-based foods, that makes them look like more premium products. I don't know why, but this is just a thing. It might be, it kind of smacks of like Marks and Spencer's vibes, to be honest.
Yes, I was about to say. Yeah, M&S. Yeah. So for anyone who's wondering who hasn't got Marks and Spencer in their country, they're like one of the sort of premium supermarkets here in the UK, and their colour is black, right? And I think people just kind of associate that premium kind of stuff with black. There's psychology that goes into like why we see certain colours as certain things. But the green works as well because it's greenwashing. We know where this term comes from.
Exactly.
We associate green with this kind of positive thing, and you can see an aisle with like factory farmed meat, but if it's got these like little green labels sticking out, the first thing you think of is, these animals were roaming around outdoors and stuff their whole life. Why? Because there's green bits on the aisle. Why else? Like this is just the kind of power that this sort of stuff can play in marketing.
Yeah. And
Right.
just to add to that, on page, I think it's page 18, they say the colours that shoppers found most engaging were found in the farming aisle, very closely followed by health, with both using shades of green. Green conveys subliminal messages of health, natural and sustainability for shoppers. That I've just realised that sentence they wrote doesn't make radical sense, but it is usually associated with goodness and positivity and encourages shoppers when at fixture. So, not to like jump around the document too much, so we'll go through it step by step, but what you're saying, like the color that you present meat as does have actually a massive impact on how likely people are to go and buy it. And also just to illustrate that, because people might think, oh, you're just kind of like clutching at straws, it's only like a few percentage points difference, why is it so interesting? Well, actually, if having like green, nice farming themed meat aisles encourages just 5% more people to go and buy meat, well, given that 1.2 billion animals are killed in the UK every year, if that increases by 5%, that's another, 60 million animals dead. And so actually, because of the scale of the issue, just these tiny percentage point changes that the AHDB are encouraging meat companies to make in their marketing, that actually has such a huge impact on such an uncountable number of individuals that every single percentage point counts. And so understanding how they do this is paramount importance.
Very good points. Thank you, Rory. Right. So then the last bullet point. These findings hold universal appeal regardless of where shoppers usually buy the meat. Supermarket, discount, premium or convenience. So that's saying at a convenience store, if you have sort of like the meat aisle labelled with those like little black bits and stuff, they associate that as a more premium convenience store than others, for example.
Yeah.
And if you go into, I don't know, a discount kind of store like Lidl or Aldi, where like the prices are very low, having green things means the same there as having green things in like a premium store like Waitrose or M&S or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And they do say in this report actually that in more like low end, like budget type supermarkets, presenting the meat as like a premium option is actually off putting to customers. Whereas it's in the high end supermarkets where presenting it as a premium increases sales. Because obviously when you've got poorer folk who don't have as much money to splash around, when something looks premium, they're just going to walk away from it. And so actually there is some nuance in how you get different demographics to come and buy more meat.
Interesting. Okay, let's have a look at this page then. Thing is, I don't want to blab and read like every single bit of text here. So
I can break it down with you if you want. I've got notes on it all. So,
cool. Yeah,
this
break
is
this one down. Cheers.
The background. Essentially, we spend a hell of a lot of money on meat. It's about £18.5 billion every year in grocery shops. There was some fluctuation around the pandemic, so we actually decreased meat purchasing just before the pandemic, and then afterwards we increased it again. So and a lot of that is from these unconscious meat reducers, I guess just because society is kind of shifting away. There's some other stuff further down the page. So it says, actually, interestingly for us as kind of animal rights activists, health is the number one reason that consumers reduce their meat consumption. And so it puts us in a quandary. I was thinking this because obviously we want the animal rights message to be loud and clear. That's the most important thing. And for me then secondarily is climate, because I'm an environmentalist for the animals as well, if that makes sense. Like the environment is their habitat. So for me, those are like first and second, but for the general public, it's health. Then those who look for environmental or welfare impact of food is just less than a quarter among unconscious meat reducers, but rises to 42% among conscious meat reducers. And then also about a third of people are concerned that the food they buy is British. And again, this kind of British patriotism, British sourcing of food is a really major part of the advertising strategy that the AHDB put forth to meat producers. So yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of the background. It's just kind of where we're at currently with buying meat.
And what is meant by unconscious reducers?
Yeah, so those are people who if you look at their kind of, I guess, purchasing statistics, they will be buying less meat and maybe less animal products in general. Perhaps they don't know why that is, or they haven't noticed that trend in and of themselves. Like they'll just kind of just naturally be buying less stuff, and it might be because maybe they're being priced out of buying as much meat, and so in order to keep the weekly shop the same financial value, same
Yeah.
costs, maybe they're just buying less of it with like cost of living type stuff, or it's just society's general shift away. There's now more alternatives to buying meat than there was 5-10 years ago, and so naturally, if your shop is just a random sample of what there is in the supermarket, well, naturally that's now going to include less meat because there's more alternatives to it, if that makes sense.
Okay, and yeah, I'm seeing this text here that you were just talking about. So, so here's, with trust in British farming high, now could be the time to dial this up in store. So this is what they're looking at doing next in UK supermarkets. They want to push this idea on the packaging because for some weird reason, just having British on the pack just has good connotations because people in Britain like British stuff, right? I mean, when French people like French stuff, Indians like Indian stuff. So it's just appealing to that sense of kind of national identity and trust as well, because what you'll notice is that every non-vegan from every country that there is thinks that their own country's animal products are the best and have the highest welfare standards in the world and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, isn't that funny that, we happen to have the best animal welfare standards in the world, Rory, don't we here? But how can that be possible? Because a Canadian told me that Canada does, and a Pakistani told me that Pakistan does, and a Greek told me that Greece does. So it's quite funny, isn't it? But this is why this message is so kind of universal. Even if this is just a British Big Ag website, this is kind of probably what's happening in countries all around the world. They're going to be trying to put, German quality sausages and stuff will be on the packaging in Germany and so on.
Oh, totally. And that actually cuts to the crux of the point that I wanted to make with these kind of documents in general, that I was thinking about before coming on this stream, is that it's not just the meat and dairy industries that use this kind of language, right? It's all this like best in the world or some of the highest standards in the world.
Yeah.
That's what this document says at various points, is this kind of British. And there's a few stats in there as well that we'll probably see, which are people are the most comforted or the most kind of likely to buy animal products when you have messaging on there that says this is among the most sustainable in the world. And that reminded me of something, and I went back and I looked through my emails, and back in 2021 I emailed Dominic Raab, who's a big politician here in the UK. He was my local MP for a while, and I emailed him about basically, you should be vegan, because I always do. And he got back and sent me this stock email, and it says the UK has some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, upheld by comprehensive legislation, blah blah blah. But then I googled that phrase, some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, because again, that's basically exactly what the AHDB are telling everybody to say, is some of the highest animal welfare standards, some of the most sustainable standards in the world, etc., etc. And I found like 7 different sources, all Conservative MPs being quoted, all saying exactly the same thing, word for word, is the UK has some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world. And it's almost like all of the politicians who are in power currently have exactly the same script that they read, that is handed to them by the animal agriculture industry, whether it's the AHDB, whether it's the NFU, whoever it is. They're all reading from the same hymn book, which makes sense, obviously, because they're a political party. But it's literally the one thing that the AHDB highlights, which is the most effective way of keeping people eating meat and dairy, is saying, oh, we've got some of the highest standards in the world. Like that comes up time and time again in this document. And so it's like the politicians know exactly how to keep people eating meat and dairy. Not that it's a big conspiracy or anything, but I did notice.
I mean, it ultimately is a bit conspiracy. I mean, you don't even need to be a so-called conspiracy theorist to realise that politicians and Big Ag are in bed, right? This absolutely is what's happening here. And what I was going to ask as well is, how do you even objectively measure that? What does that mean? We have the best standards in the world. How is that even measured? That, like, there's no way of even measuring that. They say that because it's just said. It's just empty words repeated that seem to have effect.
Yeah, I mean, when you measure standards, like when you're looking at literally anything, you have to have like an objective, neutral set of standards that you're comparing everything else against. So you're like, if again, this is talking about animal welfare, not animal rights. Obviously, we believe in animal rights, but from a welfarist perspective, let's say welfare consists of, like, you set the standard at A, B, and C, and you're like, oh well, the UK has A, B, and C, but Pakistan only has A and B. Therefore, the UK is better than Pakistan in welfare standards. That's fine, but like, why have you defined your presuppositions that welfare consists of A, B, and C? Like, where does that come from? It's such a wishy-washy standard that you can't possibly measure these things, you know. I think
no one even knows what it means, do they? Like, when they say some of the best standards in the world, do they just mean it has more regulations? Well, regulations about what exactly? And those regulations could be about cruel things. Oh, the cage has to be this big, and then there'll be countries that have fewer cages, for example. Or, you know, they must have this much space, or, you know, the electric prod can only have this many bolts in it, or some volts, whatever. And it's just, I don't know how they're exactly, well, they're not. Let's face it. I don't think they are. It's just something that every country just says.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Right, moving on to this next bit. The optimal path to purchase. When it comes to changing perceptions of the meat aisle, there is no silver bullet. At different moments in time throughout the path to purchase, a mix of communication messages is necessary to help address the various concerns shoppers have when it comes to red meats. This will reassure people at their moment of purchase and also support longer-term perceptions of the category. So let's have a look at this, what they're saying here. There are 3 key milestones in this path to purchase: attracting shoppers to the aisle, engaging them with the red meat fixture, converting them to purchase. What does it mean by converting them to purchase?
So that is using like generalized marketing terminology. So when you get, say you're like a fitness coach or whatever, and you have like a conversion, that's just anybody who didn't previously buy your product, or maybe they did, they're just kind of buying a new thing from you. Converting them is just getting them to buy it, basically. So it's not quite, I know it sounds very much like convert to veganism or convert to carnism. It's literally just saying, we are just like converting customers, but that's exactly how they look at it, right? When
sealing the deal.
You and I, yeah, exactly, seal the deal. And so that diagram they show there is really interesting, because that's the 3 strands of how you convince somebody to buy meat.
Research backed.
Yeah, exactly. First, you inspire them. You give them strong foodie imagery, it says, and you plaster the aisle with like, oh, look at this roast dinner somebody made out of this chicken's carcass. And then when they're like, gets them into the aisle with these recipe ideas, then you engage them with the thing itself, and you plaster the packaging and the area around it, the shelves, with pictures of farms and farmers standing out in their wellies with their children. Things like that AHDB video that we watched, right? When the grandfather farmer guy has his granddaughter, and it's all very lovely and outdoors with animals. And then to actually purchase them, to convert them to the point of purchase, you have like the hero B12. So you say on the packaging, look, we've got B12 and it's natural, and you vegans can't get B12 and all this kind of stuff. So that's the 3 steps of making somebody buy meat. And it's fascinating that it's so explicit in this, right? They literally, cause, I mean, it is a business, it's a massive business. So of course they've done the research.
The amount of detail that goes into every little thing, it's crazy.
It's incredible. If it weren't meat, I'd massively respect the effort.
I worked in market research before, right? I used to work in a market research job. And all I'll say is, it was a good market research company that I worked for. We were a successful company. But I can't believe, even me, who comes from a market research background, looking at this, there's some stuff here that even just blows my mind. I'm like, wow, shit, is this the amount of detail that went into stuff? I don't specifically remember that much detail going into the work I did at who it was that I worked for. So this kind of shows as well just the amount of money that they're spending on getting the really, really minute details of what's happening here.
Oh yeah, and it's based on like 3 separate rounds of experiments. So they did the first round, which was just this online questionnaire, not really an experiment, with like 1,000 people. They got to do this questionnaire to get the base data of the background, and then
Yeah.
they got 4,000 people to get a VR headset on and walk around this virtual supermarket they'd created with all these different looks. And you see the screen grabs of them. That's where
Yeah.
the designs come from that we saw above. So you have 4,000 people in VR headsets. And then
Yeah.
they got a bunch more people to go into an actual physical store, and they measured their response to things. So the amount of funding behind this, having those 3 rounds of kind of experiment and data collection,
Yeah.
is quite incredible. Like it's a
Yeah.
great document. It's just convincing people to do the wrong thing by selling them lies. That's the problem.
Just these little things here, so I'm just highlighting here. Greenery has natural associations with sustainability and health. So that's on that second bit, engage with the fixture. So the reason we know now why they're showing greenery and stuff on the fixtures and stuff is because people are associating that, maybe not even so much with higher welfare, they're also associating that just through arbitrary sort of psychological color association with health and stuff. So even the color green is making people assume that, I don't know, red meat doesn't cause cancer when it does. And perhaps a different colour on that red meat aisle, maybe red, maybe people would see that red colour, which we more associate with things like danger and blood. And they might associate, I don't know, the colour red with ill health. But just the colour green there makes them not think about the cancer, the diabetes, the heart disease and stuff that these products can give you.
Exactly, and not to get too evolutionary psychological on you, but because obviously evolutionary psychology is quite a contentious field, and the kind of things that it says are controversial. But there's a lot of evolutionary psychology around our color perception, right? So, for example, why is green a color that we associate with good stuff? Well, there's definitely cultural forces behind that. So now, things like everything going green and whatever is like a nice thing. But the fundamental reason that evolutionary psychologists often think that green is a thing that is good is because, well, a lot of our food is going to be green, right? Vegetation. If we look at a landscape and it's very green, we're going to think in our ape minds, there's a lot of food there. This is a good place to be. If we look at a landscape and it's barren and dry and not green in the slightest, well, we're going to think, oh crap, let's not go there, let's stay in the green space. And so actually that greenness comes back. I mean, this is a tenuous point that I could be very wrong about, but it seems to me there's a very good chance that our association of green with sustainability and health is because in our herbivorous past, or largely herbivorous past, these green spaces as apes were where we lived. Look at any wild ape or primate today in jungles and forests around the world. They live in very green spaces. They eat plants. And now we, as these kind of herbivores, convincing ourselves that we're trying to be omnivores in supermarket shopping aisles, we're selling ourselves the bodies of animals that we can't naturally digest by painting it as all green, as if it's these kind of jungles and rich, luscious landscapes that we evolved from. It's evolutionary psychological madness.
That is a huge irony. It's like they're pushing flesh products by using herbivorous evolutionary psychology.
Exactly.
So that is very interesting. Okay, moving on. So this is So this is the bit we kind of covered earlier. So this is what they found, asking people what would most attract them to the aisle, and they found the image on the top left is what attracts them most. You know what I found funny, Rory, actually, is I would be most attracted to an aisle, assuming this wasn't obviously dead animals in the aisle. I'd probably be most attracted to the one top right. Now, but I think the reason for that is because I'm vegan and I associate those green bits with the plant-based aisle, and that just kind of pops out at me. What do you think?
I had exactly the same thought when I saw it. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that looks like it's vegan stuff. That's like those like tofus that are pre-marinated and stuff. They're all exactly the same shade of teal. So I just associate that with vegan, free from.
Right. Okay. Let's have a look down here now.
Yeah, in the page below, then there's a little extract there that says in premium retail. So again, we're talking about in the UK things like Waitrose and M&S, where kind of the more well-off people typically shop. In premium retail, where shoppers also say farming strongly attracts them to the aisle at the same level as inspiration. So in richer areas, basically, this is saying, in richer places, richer shops, with more wealthy customers, you have more images of farming rather than just recipes, because I guess they know how to cook them for themselves anyway. They're not just living off ready meals and stuff as
Yeah.
we poor folk often do. But it's saying actually it doesn't matter as much having that inspiration and recipe ideas. What's more important is having pictures of the lush British countryside, which I find is quite an interesting little point.
Right. Okay. And then what are these little quotes here? These are about. What are these quotes about here, Rory?
Those are from actual people who took part in the study. These are like extracts from questionnaire responses.
Right.
So this is saying, I think this is talking about the inspiration, right? So it's
Why
very
inspiration
helpful in
came
one way.
first, or yeah,
Exactly. Because across the board, it's still always foodie imagery. It says is the most effective way at getting people to buy food. So one person says it's very helpful in one way, as some people have no idea how to cook meat, so that would be ideal. Others are saying sometimes I'm put off buying certain stuff because I'm not sure how to cook it, or you'll begin to reduce the stress I feel for shopping for expensive meat if you know what to do with it, basically.
right.
Yeah, those are what people actually say and what they feel about including all this foodie imagery in an aisle with full of meat.
So this part here says, what had the most positive intuitive appeal for all shoppers was the foodie imagery. This meant that people were already less focused on buying a product and more focused on creating a meal. This further builds on the importance of meat in growing basket size, with Kantar usage data suggesting that when meat, fish or poultry... Why do they separate those things? Meat, fish, or poultry? What?
I've never quite understood why it's.
It's like when then people say, "Oh yeah, no, I don't eat meat. I just eat chicken, or I just eat fish or whatever." And it's like, well, it's all animal flesh.
Oh yeah.
Is bought from a retailer. That retailer will own £3 in every £4 spent on customers' plates. Yeah, do you know what that kind of thing is saying there?
Yeah, I think so. The top bit is pretty obvious. It's saying that people are most influenced when they see like nice looking food. So when there's all these kind of banners of pre-made roast dinners and everything in meat aisles. Yeah, I'm not quite sure the relevance, because I did wonder this when I first read it. The relevance of that Kantar data is basically saying the retailer owns £3 in every 4 on customers' plates. That's essentially saying the retailer itself. So, like, I don't know, Sainsbury's is making far more profit on it than the actual producer of the food in the first place.
Right.
I believe, but I am struggling to work out the relevance. I'm not going to lie.
Okay, no worries.
And I thought that when I first read it.
Yeah, and then this bit, as an aisle, 36% of shoppers agreed that the inspiration concept had the most engaging, enticing images, compared to 30% for farming and 22% for health. So the black inspiration bit was the key thing, and then they also loved the green bits, the farming and the health bits.
And what's interesting is animal welfare has no place in that whatsoever, really. Like, it's all sustainability and B12. And here's this roast dinner you can make, and it's never the actual animals themselves. And it comes on to that slightly later on with the images of animals and what images you should use, if any.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And it says here, not only did the images work alone, but they also had an important role in raising the efficacy of certain messages. One example is the statement, "Showcase your steak," as a message alone. This resulted in 19% of shoppers saying it would make them extremely likely to visit the aisle and buy red meat. This rose to 26% when accompanied by an image. So these kind of things here. So they're just saying, just a short statement here with an image is what's kind of pulling people into these aisles to market.
Yeah, and it's also it's also a call to action. Not saying buy our steak, but it's like, come and show us how good you are at making steak, right?
Right.
And so you can scan that QR code, I think, and you can submit like a picture of your steak that you've cooked. And it reminds me of like the whole marketing steak to men thing and all these adverts about barbecues and all this kind of stuff. And it's like,
yes,
how good a steak can you make? Like I know so many guys throughout the course of my life who have these, and I used to be one of them as well, and we'd have these extended conversations about the best way to cook a steak or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, looking back now, I'm like, what the hell was I doing?
Yeah.
But it's such kind of like a masculine thing, and I think the black as well. It just appeals to men particularly. It feels like, it's like steak and dark and big font and come and show us how good you are and have you got, show us what you're made of, kind of thing. Like it just feels like it's a man's place to be almost. Do you know what I mean?
That
Like,
competitive thing as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Show us what you're made of, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, right, let's have a look at this page. This one looks interesting. What should inspiration look like? So, having product guidance for each meat and cut with details of how to cook it perfectly, including times and cooking methods. That's on the image on the left with the little white, on the text with the white background there. And then on the right, it says, having flavour inspiration in the meat aisle with the herb and spice offerings next to the meat and information on which flavours work best with different meats products.
Yeah.
Anything majorly interesting on this page, or?
Not too much. It's basically saying people just don't know how to cook stuff, and it does have some interesting implications for the vegan movement, I think, because I mean, charity I used to work for, Viva, one of the great things that they made is an app called Vegan Recipe Club, and it's like for like newbie vegans or people who are interested in eating more plant-based. Actually having those resources, even though we as vegan activists can criticize the whole kind of foodie recipe like approach. Actually having that on offer is a pretty useful thing. And even for meat, like if people don't know how to cook meat, they're not going to buy it. And so the meat industry are tapping into this recipe approach that a lot of vegans already take and saying, here's some easy stuff to do. Now come and buy our stuff and make sure we don't go under.
It's true.
But then,
well, I remember when I was in first year of university, I didn't know how to cook. I'm a bum cook now, and I think I became one in like maybe second year of uni. I got really good at cooking. But I remember first year, because I didn't know how to cook, you're right, I wouldn't buy stuff like steaks and sausages and anything like that, even though I wasn't even vegan. I was buying stuff like pot noodles, or I'd go to like Subway, or I'd buy like Bombay potato, like microwave meals, not because I wanted to eat plant-based, but just because I couldn't be asked to cook or to learn how to cook, or because I didn't know how to cook. And it's kind of scary when this red lump of flesh is put in front of you and you don't know how to cook. It's like you feel this kind of... It feels weird looking back now, because I know cooking now is piss easy, and I'm like, what? How can people not do this? But I
mean, it's in a sense the difficulty cooking meat has done a great thing for the vegan movement, because I mean, Melanie Joy, she founded the term carnism, obviously, for those who don't know. Psychologist. She originally went vegan because she got food poisoning, I believe, from improperly cooked meat, and went vegetarian for like years and couldn't stomach eating meat, not for any ethical reason whatsoever, but simply because it was difficult to cook and she didn't want to get food poisoning again. And then now we have the term carnism, so we can at least attribute something to that. Cool. I think the next real interesting bits come kind of on page 7 or so. So kind of down, kind of over halfway down the page. So it says, these findings line up with our trust and transparency research. That's a whole other report they've done on trust in the food chain, which showed that consumers see farmers as the most trustworthy group within the supply chain. Like consumers, especially in the UK, we are actually mad about farmers. Again, speaking en masse, farmers are this like massive political force that generally kind of don't even know it or don't do much, but the symbol of farmers is used so commonly by so many politicians, especially on the other side of the whole vegan debate. So many, particularly politicians in the UK, will say we need to like back British farming and support our farmers, and that's why they're not going down this whole vegan shenanigans. And it's because they've isolated the fact that a political message which hones in on supporting farmers is the best one to win them votes, right? Because we trust farmers, and if politicians can side with them, then we vote for them. That's the deal here. So that's actually fascinating research in and of itself, which is only tangential to this report that we're reading now.
It's weird, isn't it, that farmers, I mean, obviously farmers do an incredibly important job. They feed us.
Oh,
But
yeah.
specifically, animal farmers are seen as this huge protected group. But it's never the soy farmers. It's never the oat farmers. It's always, the beef farmers are the salt of the earth. And, you vegans, you're putting people out of jobs in the meat industry and blah, blah, blah. But they will never say you're putting people out of jobs in the watermelon industry if you're not buying watermelons or anything like that. And what is it with what is it here that why do we as a society just seem to associate good and salt of the earth with beef farmer and not with, I don't know, kiwi farmer? What's going on there?
Oh, totally. I think this comes back actually to a conversation I had just last week or so with Rob Percival. So the guy we just had on the podcast, which went out this evening, he talks about the meat paradox, and he says the meat paradox is basically that we are, in his view, we are like evolved omnivores or predators, but we have this unique capacity to empathize with our prey, and so that's where the problem comes, is that we're so committed to kind of hiding the truth of animal agriculture from ourselves, especially like factory farming and kind of the worst of the worst in terms of, I guess, welfare standards. Not that it makes that much of a difference from a rights perspective, but we're so committed to hiding these things from ourselves, like not labeling slaughterhouses what they are and downplaying the factory farming and intensive animal abuse that we have across the UK, that when it comes to something like protecting animal farmers, we convince ourselves that all of them must be the best of the best, and that's why we have them as like a protected group in our rhetoric. And I mean, this isn't to say that farmers are by and large bad people, because I do think that good people can do bad things, and that's a controversial thing to say. Obviously, a lot of them are then bad people, just as a lot of other people are bad people. But it's so taboo almost to criticize anything about the farming community that is why we trust them so much, because if we don't, then we have to confront our own psychological ineptitudes when it comes to thinking about animals. I think that's why it is.
Yeah, I think that's a good theory. And just going back to a point I made earlier about what objective measurements are people even making to say we have the best this in the world. One point I didn't even think about was that we all use different metrics depending on what country we're from to say that. So a British person might say, we have the highest welfare standards in the world because we use stun guns here, and a vet inspects the slaughterhouse or something like that. But then a Somali might say, well, in Somalia, most of our animals are not factory farmed, whereas in the UK, most of your animals are factory farmed.
Oh, yeah.
And the British person could say, well, you use the halal method and you don't even stun them or whatever in Somalia. And then the Somali could just say, well, number one, this and that. And number two, at least they get space to run around and stuff before they get killed and stuff. Whereas in Britain, they're all crammed up in cages and blah, blah, blah. So it's like the different metrics we use to measure this are just crazy depending on what country it is, that it gets to the point where literally probably any country could just say, we have the best welfare standards in the world, and could possibly even build a compelling case for it, as absurd as that would absolutely be, because you look at every country and it's just horrific. There are even some countries that literally have no animal welfare laws at all, like China I still think doesn't.
China has no animal welfare standards whatsoever. Yeah,
no, it's shocking.
Yeah, I do agree. Like, you could very easily say Somalia. I don't know anything about Somali animal welfare, but you could so easily build that case. That is, in my view, part of the problem with welfarism is, and there are benefits to welfarism. Don't get me wrong. I've had some pretty compelling cases from a pragmatic point of view, in terms of, say, when you increase welfare standards, whatever that means, that basically makes it more difficult to farm animals. There's more hoops that need to be jumped through. That pushes up the cost and that prices people out of eating animals. And so from like an incrementalist perspective, actually, it is pretty good to have these kind of welfarist organizations who fight for that kind of thing. But I do agree, like, the problem is the absolute scale that you're using, because there's no such thing as an absolute scale of welfare. It's just a relative scale. And so you can't make any watertight cases for we're there now. It needs to be a legal implementation of actual rights that actually protect sentient beings. And that's the bottom line for me.
So they've got a bit about plastics here now. So they're just talking about when the concept of reduced plastic packaging in the meat aisle was put to consumers. it achieved a high level of appeal. So obviously there's a pushback against plastic now, as there should be. That's fine. But the meat industry now is using this to sell meat products. They're going to ultimately... It's not that they really care about the environment or anything like that. I mean, that's entailed in the fact that they're farming animals, which is the most environmentally destructive way of farming food. But nonetheless, they're going to reduce plastic packaging, which is, every cloud has a silver lining and all that, because this is ultimately going to result in more profit for them. So this increases trust and transparency. If they say, now we use less plastic on the packaging, they found that people are more likely to pick up a pack of sausages or a burger or whatever if they're just saying that on the packaging.
Exactly. It's greenwashing, plain and simple. Really interesting bit actually comes also in the paragraph just following that. So it says, the environmental message that came out strong was providing information on how red meat from the UK has lower emissions than other countries and is amongst the most sustainable in the world. Again, that's coming back to what I said about all these politicians and all the different people saying the UK has some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world. Yeah. This is exactly the same message, just talking about environmental sustainability. Right. And this is what people love to hear is, hey, we're already great. Like, we're already doing enough. And I was literally just before this, I was chatting to some of my dad's friends actually, who we talk about like climate things and JSO and all this. And anyway, we've got a group chat. It's very interesting. And anyway, I was saying, like, on the climate front, when you say, because somebody made a point that we are the 8th best in the world on the climate front, I was saying, yeah, but for the environmental activist, what that means is there's like a tsunami heading towards your village, and you're saying, hey, I'm like the 8th fastest runner in town. I'll be fine. I'll just jog along. And the environmental activists are like, no, like, wake up, run. There's a tsunami. From an animal welfare point of view, saying we are amongst the best in the world means nothing, because it's like there's such a tsunami of just horrific exploitation and abuse across the world. Saying that we are some of the best actually means sod all when it comes to protecting sentient beings who deserve to be protected because they're sentient and they ought to have rights. It's absurd, but
in a world so messed up. Yeah, it's not hard, is it, to have quote unquote the best in the world or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the next? Oh yeah, and then just on the top of the next page it says the traditional, is talking about the images you put on meat. It says the traditional image of a farmer outdoors was particularly well received. Right. And again, coming back to that video we watched at the beginning, the traditional image of a farmer outdoors, he's a granddad, he's got his granddaughter, it's just a lovely little family thing. Yeah. It's so traditional and lovely. That is, that's what we view meat as. And later on in this, I can't remember where it comes, but maybe it's in another report. There's a bit where it talks about how people in the UK, by and large, don't associate farming with anything bad. There's these stats where, trying to find it now, where like most of people in the UK either think farming is great for the environment or is neutral for the environment, and there's like a tiny sliver of people, and they're all vegans, who say, actually, no, it's pretty crap for the environment what we're currently doing. But it's all these like traditional ethics washing that we do. Right,
and they always say to the vegan stuff like, yeah, you lot are importing all these fruits and vegetables over from other countries. And it's like, do you know how much shit is imported to feed the quote-unquote cattle that you eat? Yeah. All the soy and shit, the soy deforestation in the Amazon and all that kind of stuff is getting transported over to the UK by the absolute bucket load to feed farmed animals. Of which there are more in the UK than there are humans. I mean, Wales has more sheep than there are humans. I'm sure England will have more chickens than there are humans. And you never see them, by the way. You never see chickens going around the countryside in the UK. The only animals you tend to see, I think, going around in the UK is sheep and cows. But I've seen pigs once going through Norfolk on the train. On the outdoors, and I've never, I don't think, come across just chickens roaming around on all these magical free range farms that every single non-vegan seems to buy from. But where are all these birds that every non-vegan whose eggs they're eating?
Trust me, every non-vegan checks thoroughly where their meat is coming from, and they know the animals. Actually, they know all of the animals by name, and they know they have great lives.
Every single one, and they're always able to tell you the name of the farm as well. If you ask them the name of the farm, they'll come up with it straight away. They won't scramble around looking for another answer. Right. Do you have a next page to go to? That's
next bit, I guess. If you go page 9, kind of halfway down or so. There's at the end of that paragraph, not to read the entire thing. There'll be, I'm sure, links in the description below if you want to read these documents for yourself. There's it says details on vitamin B12, including how it helps support a normal immune system or helps reduce tiredness and fatigue, creates tangible consumer benefits. These two concepts, so general vitamins and minerals and specific health benefits of B12, have a strong correlation in the propensity to buy metric at 60% compared to an average of 38%. So that's a 22 percentage point increase when you say, hey, this is full of B12. Hey, this has loads of vitamins and minerals that you need, or a natural source of B12 rather. This is a massive difference. Again, again, 22%. Imagine how many animals are killed in a year in the UK. If they're using B12 to increase that by 22%, then we as vegan activists need to know how to combat that claim. That's like a lot of people just disparage the health data as just plant-based, not vegan. In actual fact, if this is causing 22% more animals to die, that is a massive problem. And that's why B12 is such a thing. Again, when you're out on the street doing vegan outreach and people are like, oh, but B12 though.
Yep.
Well, how do people know about B12? It's such a niche thing that nobody before a couple of years ago, probably only people very interested in nutrition would know what B12 was. Now everyone knows it by name, and it's because of documents like this one that we're reading. It's this marketing advice given to meat companies for them to put B12 on their packaging, for all their PR stunts about eating balanced that the AHDB do. That's how this message about B12 gets filtered down through society, and what keeps people eating meat at a rate that's 22% higher than they would otherwise. And that is obviously a massive problem.
Yeah, very interesting observations there. I think you're definitely onto something there, and we should absolutely, this is why it's good we're doing this live stream, because they're coming forward with these tactics. This is now helping give us the information on how we can push back. So if this is what they're going to use to combat veganism, we need to know how to combat this. So I think it's very important that, if they're going to make B12 the hero, thanks for the tip. Maybe we should make B12 the hero when it comes to reasons why anyone can eat a plant-based diet, because you can eat you can get as much B12 as you want through fortified food, supplementation, whatever, which is ultimately what they're doing anyway. I just want to say as well, I always say back to non-vegans, you can get as much B12 as you want from fortified foods or whatever. As a vegan, you don't even need to take a supplement if you don't want. And I say, yeah, but fortified foods, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, number one, it doesn't matter anyway, ethically. It's just an appeal to nature, whatever. We use science in every aspect of our lives. So it's just a fake concern you have if you're talking about getting B12 naturally. But number two, what was I going to say about this?
Something about fortified foods.
Yes, that's it. Steak or whatever actually is a quote-unquote fortified food. So there's no difference between buying a steak for B12 and eating Marmite, which has B12 added to it, or nutritional yeast or something. They're both actually quote-unquote fortified foods. So that dead cow flesh has B12 artificially added to it throughout the cow's life. So that, if that's not a fortified food, I don't even know what is.
Exactly. And not even just with B12, but any meat that you get from a supermarket, right? Like take salmon, for example, the pinkness of salmon.
Yeah.
If they didn't add all these dyes and chemical preservatives to the salmon itself, it would look grey, right? It's a dead fish. There's no reason for it to be that bright pink. And salmon, and they've done tests on this as well. I read about that in a separate thing a couple of years ago. But they kind of tried to sell salmon just as a grey thing, and nobody was buying it. They add all this stuff to it to make it bright pink, and everyone's all over it. And it looks like a healthy, great superfood. And same with other meats and everything. You add all of these kind of preservatives to them to give them the redness, even though they were killed many days or weeks ago. You keep that rich redness to them, and people are like, oh yeah, that looks great and nutritious. In actual fact, it's just the chemical mirage that you're seeing.
Wow. Yeah. So there's so much stuff that goes into making that product look appealing from an artificial standpoint, and yet you get these kind of propaganda pieces like this ultimately that's kind of trying to purport the fact that the vegans, they're doing all these kind of unnatural things, and hey, this is the real way you should be living. And actually there's so much artificial crap that goes into animal agriculture stuff.
Absolutely. I think the next bit, you can skip the next few pages probably, up to page like 13 or so. So this table at the bottom half of page 13 shows the point that we are just talking about. So this is a table that says the percentage of people extremely likely to percentage of people who are extremely likely to be encouraged to visit the meat aisle and buy red meat by these different kind of marketing strategies. The top three are saying this meat is high in protein and provides vitamins and minerals. This is rich in protein and vitamin B12, and this is a natural rich source of vitamin B12.
Right.
So these are like a quarter of people would be influenced by these. And again, you can see like the percentage differences between all these different options are not big. But again, if you have a difference between 26% and 21%, that is 5% more animals dying. And given how many already do, that is a massive change. And so, optimizing this like meat marketing is a terrifying thing. And this is why everybody gets this message about protein, vitamins, minerals, B12. Because the meat industry know that's how they get people to buy their stuff.
Another point I want to make about this whole natural thing is there's no one eats naturally in 2023. There's no such thing as a natural source of vitamin B12 unless you literally are just going out and eating foraged food off the ground in cobalt-rich soil, or you're drinking untreated water or something like that. But even just farmed animals themselves are not natural. Means something that is not man-made, right? These are domesticated animals, okay? These are man-made animals. These animals, chickens, pigs and cows that we see on farms, are inventions. They're creations. Wild animals do not look like this. They don't grow like this. They do not provide this kind of, I say provide, wild animals aren't, obviously we don't see them as providing anything. Their bodies just belong to them. Their eggs are for them, blah, blah, blah. There's no such thing as a natural source of B12 if you're talking about farmed animals. These animals are artificially bred. They're a human invention that are designed to look like a certain way. Even if it was true that they weren't fed B12 supplements, which they are, so it's a marketing scam in one point, even if they're saying a natural rich source of blah, blah, blah. But even if it wasn't the case, it would still be dodgy marketing, them saying that, because there's no such thing as a natural farmed animal. They're just inventions from humans.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is the naturalistic ethic, right? Is this psychological reaction people have to thinking, oh, something is natural, therefore it is good. You know, what's really natural is malaria. That's a supernatural thing. That's not good. Like ethically speaking, it's a totally different kettle of toefish, right? What is natural versus what is good, and just saying it's a natural source of B12. Well, like, great, but it's also a dead animal, and that's what you're forgetting to say on that packaging.
I'm also intrigued as to why, for example, look at this one is quite low, provides up to 10 essential nutrients. Now, you'd think that one would score quite high, but what I think is happening here, Rory, is, and this perhaps goes back into this whole masculinity thing, the focus on protein, I think this is big for the idea of bodybuilders and strength. It's the idea that meat gives you strength. People still fallaciously associate meat with strength, even though you can get strength from plants, as the strongest animals on the planet prove: gorillas, rhinos, elephants, buffaloes, so on. I think that's what's happening here. Do you think that? Because, otherwise this should be the top statement, right? Provides up to 10 essential nutrients. I mean, that sounds amazing. So what is so amazing about high in protein and provides vitamins and minerals? What's so amazing about that?
So the protein thing, there's a lot of really interesting history that I'll do a disservice to because I can't remember the exact order of events, but it's like in the 1950s, I think it was, the USA kind of nutrition board or whatever it was, and go and look this up, what I'm about to tell you, because I'll get some facts wrong, but they had this recommendation all of a sudden that I think it came out of the military perhaps, that everybody eat like loads of protein. It was like post-war optimism, like it was, and protein was the big thing. And it was like the average recommendation was like 110 grams a day. And it's like, you don't need 110 grams a day unless you're massive. But this was what everybody was learning. And we've never quite unlearned that fact. Like it was just dodgy science saying you need all of this protein. And you in fact don't unless you've got very specific bodybuilding goals or whatever. And people only associated protein with animals. And I do think it is particularly like a masculinity thing. And I think that's a whole live stream in itself, is the way that meat is marketed to men. I mean, you look at adverts on TV and it's like men are at barbecues grilling steaks, women are eating salads and yogurts. That's what we do, you know. And if you believe the marketing hype, that is how we eat. But actually, if you look at like male life expectancy, for example, it's a couple of years shorter than women's. If you look at the stats as to how much meat we eat, men eat a lot more than women do in a given day, on average, again, in the UK especially.
Interesting.
If you look at like meat-related diseases and the major killers of men, they match up perfectly. It's heart diseases and cancers and all these kinds of things.
Right.
It is the case that because meat is being so specifically marketed and targeted towards the male population, we are dying at a far greater rate. There's other things at play as well. It's not just the meat industry killing off men in one big conspiracy, but it is a significant factor in why men die so much. And it's because partly we have this like protein, get big and strong, protein comes from meat, eat lots of meat, get lots of diseases, die early. You also, there's other stats whereby men care less about their own health, for example, than women do, like on average by a significant number of percentage points. And
it's crazy as well, Rory, because you'd think this whole truther crowd who think we're part of the NWO and all this, if they are going to talk about, you know, the depopulation agenda and stuff, why aren't they focusing on what you just mentioned a moment ago there, that they're targeting men with these messages about eat our product, and it's killing them, it's giving them diseases because of the way that they're marketing them? Why aren't they focusing on that, and instead they're talking about vegans trying to whatever it is we're doing with the soy, even though non-vegans probably consume if not more soy than we do, but that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, the whole soy gives you man boobs, and what they don't say in that is, one, it's not true, but two, meat gives you erectile dysfunction. So, you know, it's like it's one or the other, and soy obviously doesn't give you man boobs, but it is provably true that a high meat consumption increases your cholesterol load, increases your blood pressure, narrows your arteries, restricts blood flow to various parts of the body that you might value. And so it's like that is a thing that is absolutely certain in medical science, and is provable across so many different studies and meta-analyses. And it's like this just isn't talked about in the whole truther crowd. It's insane.
Wow. Okay, next up, where are we going next, Rory?
Yeah, just the top of the next page, actually, the farming page. So this is talking about farming statements. So supporting UK farming expertise was the most liked across all statements tested, including health and inspiration, proving that backing British is an important message for shoppers. And this is the point I was making earlier. That whole supporting UK farming, backing British, obviously it's important. Like it's outside of the scheme of animal agriculture, we should actually be shopping local. Like it is, in an ideal case, we'd be supporting our own economy and reducing food miles. Not that they are that important in the grand scheme compared to what we eat. But anyway, so it's not controversial stuff. It's just only applied in the realm of animal agriculture, as we said before. And also, it's not only an important message for shoppers. What more concerns me as well is it's an important message for voters. Like when you're looking at what people like Therese Coffey, Rishi Sunak, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab and all these people say in their statements, like when I emailed Dominic Raab, he says, oh yeah, our animal welfare standards are among the highest in the world and we ought to back British farming and buy local and support a local economy and all this. Yeah. And it's like, sure, but you've missed the point. It's that sentient beings here in Britain, local to us, are being exploited for our own purposes, and that's not on, you know. And then further down this page, we see another table, and it says what is more likely to encourage you to visit the meat aisle and buy red meat. And the top one, and this isn't just the top for farming, but this is the top answer for across the board, whether it's inspiration or health or farming. 30% of people would be more likely to visit the meat aisle and buy red meat if it's supporting UK farming expertise. And so this is the big clincher, right? It's all about supporting UK farming expertise and backing British and this kind of like patriotism about meat. And that's exactly the message that not only industry are telling us, but that politicians are telling us as well. So yeah, but again, it's not actually something I disagree with, because we do ought to be supporting UK farmers.
Yeah.
It's just that when they're farming animals, that is then a different, again, kettle of toefish.
What does it even mean? Supporting UK farming expertise? Like, what? That just sounds vague to me. How does does it mean, like, when you buy like a steak, there's this team of like scientists who will like take your money and like analyze UK farming and make it more expert-y? Like, well, I don't get it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. What does it mean?
I think what it's doing is, makes more sense if you look at the one below it and interpret it in that context. So supporting a lifetime of UK farming. So what it's doing is it's highlighting the fact that the farmers who have made the thing that you're about to buy, the part of the body or whatever, they are experts in their field, perhaps experts in sustainability or welfare, or whatever. It's kind of, it gives them more credentials, I suppose.
Right.
And so that's why they've added this in. It would make sense if it was just supporting UK farming. That would be fine.
Yeah.
But they've added a little extra, cherry on top, I guess, with expertise.
All right. Where are we going next?
Where we go next? I think we're nearly done with this report, to be fair. There's a few other things. So at the bottom of page 15, you can see a little messaging best practice and messaging learnings at the bottom of page 15. So yeah, again, hero British product and farmers' expertise. That's the really big thing. And then the learnings were that assurance schemes can reassure. So that's a whole other thing. That's the RSPCA assured and red tractors. Those do reassure people, even if I find in activism, like, people don't really know what they mean at all. They just generally reassure people. A company or spokesperson wasn't appealing. And environment, this one confused me at the bottom. Environment needs detail and simplicity. How does that work? I don't know.
Yeah.
you need simple details.
Right.
But yeah, and I think, and the final bit that's really pertinent is page 17 for this report. I know we've been on it for over an hour now.
Yeah.
But the second paragraph of page 17, you can see there's pictures of animals below it. It says, images that were preferred include cows and sheep outdoors in the British countryside, as opposed to animals indoors and pigs even outdoors. Like, that makes me feel for the pigs, regardless of the exploitation they're going through. But the fact that people just think they're so ugly that they wouldn't buy stuff if there's a picture of a pig on it.
Hang on. I have an alternate theory.
Yeah.
Is it that, I don't know, could it be that also pigs are actually very cute as well, even though they're seen as these demonized, like, hated animals? Could it be that when people see like a pig outdoors, they see this animal with quite like human-like eyes, which pigs do, and they actually think, shit, there's this pig outdoors who was seemingly enjoying themselves, and actually I feel bad, I want to feel detached from this animal, but now I'm feeling too maybe attached to them. So it could be the opposite of what we said. I don't know. I guess we don't know.
Yeah, that is very true, actually. I mean, there's the fact that pigs are kind of hairless. Right? I mean, they're not hairless, but they look very pink in the typical pig that we farm here in the UK. And maybe that pink, big, round face just reminds us of our own or something. Or maybe they're too kind of dog-shaped as well. So maybe that's a factor, to be fair. But yeah, you can scroll down and you can see the pictures that they've presented. So you've got some sheep like grazing in front of the white cliffs of Dover. And if you see that, you're like, oh yeah, fantastic, I'll buy that lamb.
I think that's superimposed, right? Is that photoshopped?
I don't actually know. I can't tell. But then below it, you see a bunch of presumably are they dairy cows? I think they might be beef cows. but calves by any means, inside a shed, and you're like, well, I'm not buying that because that's awful. And yet, like 99% of animal products in the UK are factory farmed in conditions infinitely worse than these. Even 20% of dairy cows never even go outside; they're zero grazed for their entire lives here in the UK, and that's
Right.
only rising. But we don't show those because if we show pictures of those, that's where people stop buying products. And this is
Right.
where vegan activism comes in: is when you meet somebody on the street and you see a picture of this stuff, even if it just plants a seed in your head, and you don't go fully vegan, you still kind of you've seen this thing, and you might be less likely to go and buy something. So that's where the power of sharing on social media and doing street outreach comes in, is just combating these marketing tactics that the meat industry use.
I have another theory as well about the pig thing. Now that we see the image, and this goes back to the color thing. When you see pigs outdoors, like in this image, there's a lack of greenery because pigs like to go around on dirt and stuff. They don't care that much about grass, as they do eat grass. They eat loads of stuff. Pigs do,
Yeah.
but they tend to eat like the stuff that they're fed to them in these trough kind of things that you can see here. Now, we saw earlier in this PDF that green was associated with health and sustainability. Could it be that when you see images of pigs even outside, what you're mainly seeing is browns and greys, and that association is with cancer and death and depression and lack of sustainability and so on? It looks like quite a dreary image, doesn't it, that you see compared to these images that you see here?
Yeah, it's eminently possible. It's impossible to say with the data that we're given, but it's a very likely story, I think.
Interesting.
But that is pretty much everything that's of real interest in that report. If you want to see on page 19, they've put together a mock-up of what this would look like if you apply all of the learnings they've given you, all of the information, the data that they've got.
Right.
And you're like, well, what would the ideal meat aisle look like? You can see that. So the top image on page 19, that is, you can see all the kind of posters coming out. They are about the dishes. That's like discover delicious dishes, this way for mealtime inspiration, showcase your steak, delicious meals made easy, all this kind of stuff. So it's all about the meals. You scroll down, and then that's when you're looking face on at one of the shelves.
Yep.
And it's abysmally photoshopped together, but it's then got the UK farming expertise. So on there, it's supporting UK farmers and traceable, sustainable produce.
The smiling farmers here as well.
Smiling farmers, exactly. So that's on the shelves themselves. Yeah. And then in the left of that, you see the actual product. So these are the meatballs. So the minced flesh of an actual animal who's died to be there. And you see on there, it's a rich source of vitamin B12.
Right.
Scan here for healthy recipes. Right. So you see that the aisle at large, when you blow up the entire aisle, you've got meal times, and then on the shelves you've got UK farming, and then on the product you've got health. And those are the three big things, and that's how they recommend to put them together. And also you'll notice all of the colours, green, but it's images of food, black background. That is the optimum meat aisle.
Wow, so this is the perfect meat aisle we got here, folks, as researched by this market research company that this big ag lobbying thing is using. So this is what it would ultimately look like based on all the findings that they've poured all this money into. So we're probably going to see supermarkets in the UK look like this very soon, taking on this data. So basically, everything that me and Rory are saying in this live stream that we're exposing here today, be prepared when you go into the supermarkets soon. You're going to probably see the meat aisle start looking like this: the greens, the blacks, the smiling farmers, and then the B12 thing on the front of the packaging. And this is what's going to make it sell, according to all this research.
Yeah, exactly. And AHDB don't stop there. They've got, I mean, as we said at the beginning of the stream, they've got so many reports. I don't know if we've got time to go through them because it's been an hour and a half of just on that one. But
we'll go to the next one. That's fine.
Yeah, we'll do the next one. Yeah. So that was the meat-free products can be confusing to shoppers. Is that right? Yes.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So let me just. This one is
brilliant if you want your trust in humanity's in general intellect to be eroded entirely.
So this is some research. So this is Grace Randall here, who is the Retail and Consumer Insight Manager. And she's done this article saying some meat-free products could be confusing to shoppers. So this is about the plant-based alternatives. Now, is there a PDF for this, Rory, or is it just this page that we're looking
No,
at?
it's just this page. So it's just an article. It's not an entire report, no.
Okay, cool. So let's have a look at this. So clear labelling is important to enable shoppers to choose the right products for them. Shoppers expressed a level of confusion with meat-free products. There is a clarity spectrum based on how familiar shoppers are with a brand and how explicit the product is about being vegan or vegetarian. There is a level of awareness with consumers that meat-free products are trying to replicate meat, with 69% agreeing meat-free products try to describe themselves in a way that sounds like meat, aka the euphemisms.
How awful.
Yeah, terrible. This leads to half of shoppers saying meat-free products shouldn't use words like steak or bacon. So this is just carnism in action.
Yep.
Sound like meat. Steak and bacon, again, are euphemisms. The animals aren't steak or bacon. And even when now, and anyone trying to catch me out and saying, but George, people do say they eat lamb and chicken. Right, okay, true. But they never still associate with that with the individuals. They say lamb, chicken. They don't say, I eat lambs. I eat chickens. So even with the products where you do say the animal's name, there's still that disassociation there. But in any case, it's funny that of all the things they chose to make an argument there, instead of even saying lamb or chicken, they said steak or bacon, which it's just meaningless euphemisms anyway, that anyone should be able to use for any product that they make. Because pigs aren't bacon, cows aren't steak. What do these things even mean?
The primary problem here for me is an etymological one, is a linguistic one, right? Because the word meat itself, I mean, you've had like mince pies, I assume.
Yes.
That mince is called mince meat, right?
Yes.
But it's not meat, it's just chopped up fruit and stuff in a kind of I don't even know what it is now I'm talking about it. I've got no idea what's in a mince pie, but it's not meat, right? But it's called mince meat. And the reason for that is the word meat back in like the 17th century referred to any kind of food. Like all food was just meat, right? It's just, that's what it is. It refers to all kind of vegetables and fruits and bread and everything. It's all just meat. That's a word for food.
Right.
And then it evolved to just refer to the flesh of an animal. And so that is linguistic evolution in progress. And that's fine because that's how language works. And now we just use the word meat for plant-based meats. And it's like, well, it's the same purpose. You know, it's the same sort of thing in a meal. It just gives a good description of what it is.
Yeah. It's like they're talking about, carnivores eat meat. No, carnivores don't eat meat. They eat animals, is what they're eating, right? But if you want to talk about, if you are being so hung up on the definition of the word, then you could say, carnivores eat meat. So do herbivores, because meat just means food stuff. We've even seen, you mentioned about the evolution of the linguistics there, but we even see like an old hangover from that with regards to like coconuts, for example, because coconuts are mainly used for drinking. So when we eat it, we refer that to the coconut meat, don't we? We eat the meat of the coconut. So that's an example of how that language used to be used and how it's kind of come away from that now to mean to be a euphemism for dead animal that kind of just detaches people from what they're eating, actually.
Exactly. And coconut milk as well, of course, is the other example there.
Very good. Yes, very good point. Yeah. So the coconut is the perfect example of how.
It really is.
Yeah. Okay. Association with meat or meat-free products. So to understand if language used on meat-free products is misleading to consumers, we used a timed emotional response to see which words were more associated with meat or meat-free. Due to the words we used and the majority of respondents being meat eaters, the terms were much more associated with meat than meat-free products. The words most associated with meat-free products are burger, sausages, and mince. This may be because these are currently the formats which are most likely to have a meat-free product, so consumers may be more familiar with these being sold. However, less common cuts to have a meat-free product such as steak or chops have much less association with meat-free.
I mean, that makes sense, right? It's like burgers, sausages, mince, they're like formats of a thing, right? Whereas like chops is like specifically you've chopped up a bigger entity, right? So
Yeah.
a sausage is just anything that's botuliform, right? As we
There
learned
you
earlier.
go, as Rory said. Despite over half of shoppers saying they associate the words burger and sausage with meat-free products, many still say they would prefer non-meat products not to use these terms. 47% agree that meat-free products shouldn't use words like sausage and burger, with this rising to 50% agreeing they shouldn't use words like steak or bacon. I think this is people just getting defensive over the fact that there are products out that kind of replicate what they're eating, and now they've got, not that it is an excuse anyway, but they've got less of an excuse to buy the dead animal flesh, because there's this stuff that's here now that's pretty realistic that's come out. And this is why I notice people have got kind of more defensive over this, because certainly when I was a youngster, Rory, I know you're a bit younger than me, but certainly when I was at school, no one gave a toss about like the corn stuff and all that. No one really no one said, "Oh, well, why are they eating these fake sausages? What, and why are they calling them sausages?" Because people didn't really care in like the 90s and the early noughties when I grew up. But now, because that stuff has got so realistic, the sausages and the bacon, and holy crap, even that steak, like that juicy marbles steak they've got now in store. Because
I've still not tried that.
Oh, mate, it's so good. Because that stuff is getting so realistic, I think people are now seeing this as more of a threat. And it's like, how dare you call this realistic thing that kind of replicates what I'm eating very well, how dare you call it this thing?
Yeah, exactly. That's entirely what it is when veganism was small and harmless, nobody gave a toss.
Yeah.
And now that we're big and taking demand away from the meat and dairy industries, at least have the prospect to do so in future, now we're a legitimate threat to the status quo, and that's when the UK has the highest animal welfare standards or the best sustainable meat in the world comes in. And that's where these marketeers really make top dollar, is when they have a threat or a competitor to market against.
Right. So then it says, shoppers are very used to vegetarian versions of more processed items, sausages, mince, burgers, and words which describe a preparation process that can be done to different ingredients are more likely to be accepted for use on plant-based products. Nowadays, there are more meat-free cuts available to consumers, so there is a widening of categories that has a meat-free offer such as steak. This all bits a bit. Let's scroll down to the more.
It says down there actually that older meat eaters were less happy with the use of meat terms such as steak or pulled pork to describe what is not really meat. T-bone raised some eyebrows as it was hard for shoppers to imagine it being so easily achieved by a meat-free product. However, as long as the packaging was clear it was meat-free, most shoppers had no strong aversion to it.
Right.
I think what this article really is the AHDB asking leading questions to a bunch of people and noting when they raise their eyebrows, because I think the people being interviewed probably know to a certain extent this is what they're expected to say. Like, I don't think actually half of people in the UK have a really big issue with meat products. I think the AHDB is kind of exaggerating the case slightly, but I'm not surprised it is the older generation who raise their eyebrows more as more kind of traditional, I guess, and less used to things like pulled pork banana or whatever.
Right. I think this is me trying to remember some of my market research terms from my old days in market research. But I think what's happening here, what you've mentioned there, would be called what's called qualitative research rather than quantitative research.
Yeah.
So quantitative research is more driven by like data and numbers and polls and surveys. Qualitative research, people kind of go out and ask questions and gather information, and much more stuff is taken into account, like you say, things that raised eyebrows and stuff like that. It's a kind of a little bit vaguer, but it still leads to some very interesting findings. But it all depends on, like you said, how it's done. Like you said, they could be asking leading questions and stuff. Now this is interesting to me. This so this is the qualitative research in action now, the qual research. So they're showing shoppers different packaging, and they're seeing now what consumers are getting confused about when they get shown a packaging. So we see all this this vegan stuff here below. A lot of this stuff is great, by the way. I've tried, I think, most of this stuff.
Yeah.
So It says, when we showed shoppers the names on packs, it became clearer that some packs were more confusing for shoppers than others. This also came through when we asked shoppers to identify meat-free products on a virtual shelf. The most confusion came from brands which are more well-known for meat products. Brands are the first thing consumers look for when buying meat-free products. This is shown in the main drivers of buying meat-free products, with 37% of shoppers buying meat-free products because they like the brand. So, let me just fill people in on what that means for anyone who's not clear. So, you have brands like this, like Richmond, for example, who specialise in like pig sausages and bacon, and they're now doing these plant-based sausages and bacon. Consumers, if they get shown these packages here, like this Richmond plant-based bacon, although this one in the image is actually pig bacon. Actually, this is back bacon rashers. But I know Richmond do a very similar looking plant-based bacon with the packaging that looks very similar to that. To the extent that I even just got confused there looking at it, because I assumed that was the plant-based one.
Because it says plant-based products at the top. I thought it was the plant-based one. I mean, this is how they get you, isn't it?
I think they might have made a mistake in this image, because
I wouldn't be surprised it is the HDB.
It says 8 back. The back, that refers to back bacon rashers, so that's real pig bacon. Whereas the 8 plant-based rashers, say 8 plant-based rashers or 8 vegan rashers or something like that. So I think they've just made a mistake with that one image because it's so similar. But in any case, that's what they're saying. So if you see a brand like Beyond or something like that, or this, shoppers are more likely to know that's quote unquote not meat. So you can see this little arrow here going from left to right, obviously not meat, and then to the right, unclear at first glance. So the stuff towards the right is predominantly kind of, like this Better Naked and this and Richmond, because they make meat products, animal meat products. Consumers were more kind of confused by that. But then you go towards the left, and there's obviously Quorn, which no one thinks is real animal. People know that brand very well. Linda McCartney, this, Garden Gourmet, Meatless Farm.
If this is not bacon or anywhere else, I'd lose faith entirely in humanity, because it literally is called This Is Not Bacon.
Yeah. And the funniest thing, I've even seen like carnists get proper enraged, like on adverts and stuff on social medias by this. They'll be like, it's not bacon. And then it's like in the comments like, yes, this is literally the name of the product.
That's also the point of the product as well.
Yeah. But that I found that was very interesting. So this is the plant-based products on the clarity spectrum. So what the meat industry is trying to do now is they want to find a way to ensure that shoppers aren't picking up these products by mistake, assuming that it's, quote unquote real and not plant-based. Because this is something I think they're finding is happening. So non-vegans are going into Tesco, Sainsbury's, wherever, and they're picking up stuff that looks like dead pig bacon, and then they get to the till and they haven't realised, oh shit, this is the vegan version. What a shock. So this is kind of what's happening, and they're going to be trying to find ways to combat this. And what they've done is they've gone out into the field and done some research on this, and they're finding the products that people are doing this the most with. So the obviously not meat to unclear at first glance scale is what that's all about.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And what I find really interesting as well, if you scroll down slightly from there these two kind of infographic-looking females, 44, female 63. Those. And it says, it is clearest to shoppers that it is a meat alternative if the packs are green. And just ignoring the rest of that. You remember what we were just talking about with how meat companies are, from the other report, brand everything as green so it looks sustainable and nice and whatever. And the fact that green is also associated with plant-based. Can we not form like a counter movement to the whole, you can't call them sausages, where we say, well, you can't paint your stuff green then because that's our colour.
Yes. If you get a monopoly on the word sausage or bacon, we get a monopoly on the colour green. So
exactly.
Okay. And it says... And then this is the end of the article now. Meat-free packs using headline product naming words considered to be strongly associated with meat products have the potential to cause misattribution. This is especially true for brands which shoppers associate more with meat products. So that's brand like Richmond, right? Those packages which have plant-based or meat-free labelling small or in third place behind the brand and the product name can leave consumers feeling confused. While meat-free products have a lot more pressure on the packs... Wait, what? While meat-free products have a lot more pressure on the packs than meat, and is more important for these products to communicate their health and environmental credentials, these should not come at the expense of clearly informing shoppers the product is meat-free. Now, what does it mean by pressure?
What they mean by that is the pressure on the packs. I could be wrong on this, but I'm fairly certain. It's the amount of stuff you have to get on it, right? So when you have just like steak, you can just say it's steak, ingredients, cow, 100%, plus some other random crap to preserve it. And it's just like an image of some farmers. Like, it's simple, people know what it is. When it's something like Beyond Burger, for example, you have to then say, you have to include that it's plant-based. You have to have more marketing on there because there's more convincing that needs to be done. You need to include the ingredients. There's more kind of stuff to put on. Also, probably like ingredients, instructions on how to cook it. That's what they mean by pressure. You have to cram all that information about it because it's a new thing, right? It's a newer thing. People aren't used to it. And you've got to just have all these kind of disclaimers because there are more ingredients, obviously, than just cow. Plus, as we know, vitamin B12 tablets that the cow ate. So that's what they mean, and what they're saying is, despite you've got a lot more pressure on the packs than meat, you need to communicate the health and environmental credentials, etc. But they should not come at the expense of informing them, the consumers, that it's meat free, as if being meat free is like a bad thing somehow.
Yeah.
But that's what they're saying.
Interesting stuff. Yep, thanks, Rory. Okay, we'll go on to the next bit now then. Maybe the trust in farming and the environment document.
Yeah, so this one is another Consumer Insights report from January 2021, so just like 12 months into the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's quite relevant for interpreting the context of it. And it is pretty in-depth, and there's a lot of kind of graphs and all sorts. So I'll try and like point you to the really interesting bits.
Cool, yeah. And I just want to preface this for anyone who's watching. Obviously, my channel just focuses on the ethics stuff, but this PDF is about the environment. But why me and Rory thought this was important to include in this live stream is because this is ultimately how deep this marketing stuff goes, and what we need to know what the meat industry is doing to make this kind of stuff selling, and how they're trying to convince people falsely that their products are environmentally friendly. So where did you want to start with?
My motivations, as I said earlier, like animal rights through and through, predominantly, but then my concern for things like climate is very much there, and it's there because the climate is the habitat of animals, and so out of my animal rights concern springs an environmental concern as well, and so that's where I stand on the animals v climate thing. If you look at just just the second page, basically, essentially lays out what they're doing here. So in the top left, it says AHDB asked a range of questions. How do British people feel about where their food comes from? To what extent do they trust the food system? How can our industry deepen that trust in the future? Is the environment a reputational risk for farming? And what role do consumers believe British agriculture ought to play in safeguarding the environment? So you can see there, one of the key themes of this report is trust, and that's obviously in the title of the thing as well. So it's trust in farming and the environment. And just as an aside on trust, like, it's almost the most important thing almost anywhere. Like, you look at, for example, the COVID pandemic. And the whole vax versus anti-vax movement, it wasn't really ever about science, what the science said one way or another. It was largely about who you trust, right? And that's the case not just in vax and anti-vax. It's the case in climate activists versus climate deniers. It's a case of trust. And it's the case in what you buy as well, is, well, who do you trust? And it turns out farmers are like the most trusted group in the entire UK food supply chain, and therefore you obviously give their views a hell of a lot of weight. And I have to say that's not necessarily wrong, because farmers do know more about how food is produced than anybody else, whether you're talking animal or plant farmers. So the one really interesting thing that I want to point you to is on it's the next page. And down at the bottom on the left-hand side, there's like a colourful thing that says Impressions of UK Farming Sectors 2020. Yeah, that one there on the left. And you can see actually that it's not necessarily true that people, as we said earlier, have this kind of complete reverence for animal farmers. So what this graph is it has on the right in the red, you can see these are people who have a very positive view of the particular farming industry you're looking at. And this breaks down farming from fruit and veg to potato, cereal, dairy, sheep, beef, pig, poultry. So that's in the red, that's very positive. And in the kind of like cream color is very negative, and that's obviously very small. And grey is somewhat negative, and the black bit is like somewhat positive. And you can actually see fruit and veg, potato and cereal are the most positively perceived sectors in UK farming compared to any of the animal farming ones.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and pig and poultry at the bottom because they are the most intensively farmed. So people have the most negative views of those.
that is interesting because I'm wondering why I got that impression that I mentioned earlier. Because it seems that when you talk to people, it's always the animal farmers are the salt of the earth, but screw like the soy farmers or whatever. I'm wondering if it could be to do with how the question was framed. Like it could be like the British broccoli farmers or something like that. Are seen as trustworthy. But maybe if they're talking about, I don't know, the papayas that are farmed, outside the West or something like that, they have a less positive association with them than they do like a UK cow farmer or whatever. What do you think is happening here? Why do we always hear from non-vegans like this idea you're putting people out of jobs in the meat industry, but they don't say it about the watermelon industry or whatever?
Sure. I mean, it's. I think the answer actually is found in the top right of the same page. If you scroll up slightly, there's a few bits to point at. So a decrease in negative media, that section there. So that's talking about how in the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, this is why this is relevant that this was written in January of 2021. In the COVID-19 pandemic, everybody was talking about COVID, obviously. Yeah. What that meant was actually there was a massive decrease in the number of articles, of media stories covering like animal welfare abuse issues or climate issues. And so actually people, it says in there, let me find it, moving through 2020, the dominance of coronavirus in the news suppressed negative coverage of meat. For example, only 19% of consumers reported hearing stories this year. That stories about like how meat is bad for the environment or for animals. Whereas in 2019, actually, it was 37% of consumers had heard negative stories about meat that year.
Right.
And so I think this is the thing with that graph that we just looked at is you can't really tell a negative story about potato farming. Like it's just, it's presumably a friendly Irish guy somewhere with a bunch of potatoes and a field. And there's not much bad that can go wrong there. When it comes to meat animal farming, like a lot of people do have this lovely view of it being so nice and outdoorsy and all this. But there are obviously a lot more negative stories you can tell, especially if you are in any way truthful.
Okay.
And so I think that is what caused a difference, and that's why pig and poultry at the bottom of that graph, simply because they're more intensive. There's way more negative stories you can tell. It's way more obvious to everybody why this is a bad thing, right? So
I think what's happening here then is that animal farmers do have this really hardcore loyal fan base, and the ones who do support them vehemently, kind of thing. But if you're just talking about the odd, just rational, reasonable person,
yep.
They can obviously distinguish that there is something ethically worse about, farming pigs and chickens and whatever than there is about farming cauliflowers, kind of thing.
Yep.
And because there is nothing they can find negative about farming cauliflowers, but even though they eat meat, whatever, they can find something negative about chicken farming.
Exactly, yeah. And we actually see in the paragraph below the one that I was just pointing to, negative news can have major impact on consumers' buying behaviours. Recent research showed that those exposed to negativity were 18 percentage points more likely to reduce meat consumption compared to those who had not been so exposed. This drop-off in negative media during the COVID-19 pandemic, they mean. So when we would all talk about COVID and we weren't talking about animals anymore, that drop-off in negative media pertaining to the meat industry is likely to be a positive contributor to the deepening trust in agriculture. So this is like a byproduct of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that actually people started trusting animal farmers a hell of a lot more and the animal agriculture industry because they just weren't hearing as much bad stuff about it. And so this is where vegan activism has a big place to come into its own. We are essentially standing out on the street if we're doing outreach, showing people negative stuff about meat, and if that can have an 18 percentage point increase in the likelihood of them reducing meat consumption, that's obviously massive. And charities that do like investigation work, for example, if you get a big expose in a major newspaper, that is exposing people time and time again as we go on through investigation from investigation. That is exposing people to negative media, and that is increasing the likelihood they will stop consuming animal products, which obviously is a really bad thing in the context of this report from the AHDB's perspective, but is a great thing from our perspective. So that's our doing. That is
right. Good stuff. Okay. Anywhere else of interest?
Let's have a look. So this one, though, I mean, there's so much to go over with graphs and things. I'll try and avoid those because I'm conscious for many people it's late at night. But if you look on page, this one doesn't actually have page numbers. So the top of the page is called "What are the big issues for consumers this year?" Go down a few.
Oh yeah, I see it. Page 5. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, page 1. So under that heading, in the second and third paragraphs under there, says pollution from plastic waste and climate change are both in the top tier of issues in terms of what people are concerned about. Other factors also relating to the food system, including the humane treatment of farm animals, food waste, and the safety of food imports from outside the UK, occupy a secondary tier of concern and are unmoved year on year. And you can see, if you scroll down below that, there's in this diagram.
Right.
And it's got all these concerns ranked. And you can see the thing that people are most concerned about is COVID, again, January 2020. The UK economy, state of the NHS, rising energy costs. That's not to do with food. There's also pollution from plastic waste, and they've misspelled pollution because, again, it's the AHDB. And there's global warming and climate change. So that's nothing to do with animals. Animals you see in the second tier, so that's humane treatment of farm animals. Nothing but animal rights. Again, it's just, make sure you kill them nicely and give them a pat before you do so.
Right.
Bigger cages and longer chains. There's also like food waste and food import and unemployment and all this. But it's still actually relatively high compared to other things. So things like Brexit, for example, people are actually more concerned about humane treatment of farm animals than they were about Brexit, than they were about greenhouse gas emissions, than they were about rising cost of food, than they were about quite a lot of stuff actually. So like obesity, having enough food to eat in the UK, personal finances, and so on and so forth. So it, for all we disparage it, is relatively highly ranked. But
here's one thing I will say. Data on stuff to do with ethical concerns can sometimes be misleading because what you find is that people tend to say the virtuous thing in front of the researcher because it feels bad to say that you don't care about it. Like, for example, let's say you go up to someone who literally gives no money to starving kids in Africa, and they rarely think about it at all. If the researcher says, rate on the scale how concerned you are about kids starving in Africa, it's very unlikely that they're going to put not at all concerned, even if they are not at all concerned. Most people, when asked a question like that can make them look like an arsehole, will choose something that makes them seem less of an arsehole because it just feels confronting in that moment to think that you could be a bad person. It could be misleading that humane treatment of farm animals was actually ranked so high in this like concern scale. It could be the case that actually most people just don't really give a toss or aren't even thinking about it whenever. It's just not factored into their decision. But when they're confronted with that question, of course they put that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's eminently possible as well. And also, it's telling that it's not moved year on year. You see those arrows to the side of different things based on whether
Right.
they've moved up or down in the last year and by how much, the single versus double arrow. And it's just not moving anywhere, despite the preponderance of vegan activism and the massive boom in vegan products, all the exposés you like. It's not actually moved, and so that lends credence to your theory that it's just people wanting to look good, and it's roughly the same proportion of people in a representative sample will always want to look good in front of a researcher. So,
Right.
very possibly that's a cynical way of looking at it, but is likely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, the top of the next page.
Mm-hmm.
So that's focus on the environment and farming. So this is where a lot of vegans will kind of divide themselves into the two factions of kind of it's the ethics or the environment or both, or what are we meant to be talking about here? So it says around 2/3 of consumers consider the environmental impact of the food they eat at least some of the time. In recent years, concern for the environment has also been a key driver of red meat and dairy reduction, and for people adopting exclusionary diets. Notice that exclusionary diets, such as veganism and
Oh
vegetarianism.
yeah.
Such a pejorative way of talking about veganism and vegetarianism. You can see that they've got like a pie chart of the frequency with which people think about environmental impact, and below that pie chart as well there's a bar chart saying for the different reasons that people change their diets. And again, number one is people think it's healthier to eat less red meat, and number two and three are both about the environment, and number four is concerned about animal welfare. So if you look at it all in all, 80% of people reduce their animal consumption, not because they care about animals, but because they think it's healthy and it's better for the planet. So that's both
Interesting.
concerning and also enlightening for us if we want to get the vegan message across. It's an open question. I don't know where I stand on it. Is it better to talk about health and the environment than animals? It's a controversial one. What do you think?
Yeah, good question. For me, it's still no, because I think if we start getting into that mentality, it kind of purports the idea that animal rights shouldn't be enough to actually change people. And the problem is, yes, as effective as talking about health and the environment can be, that only changes the dietary side of things. And obviously, if we're trying to build a just society for animals, it's not just the food industry that we want changing. We don't want animals to be seen as slaves in any way at all, whether it's for clothing. We don't want people going to watch those enslaved elephants at the circus and all that kind of thing. I just think if we can ramp up the ethical advocacy to such an extent that people really, really are sold that is the moral imperative. I understand that someone could look at that graph and say, but George, clearly the data shows that, we should be focusing on health and the environment. But this could also just point to a flaw in our own advocacy, in that not enough vegans promote the ethical side of things. It could just be showing that vegans or plant-based people have been pretty good at selling the environmental and health aspect. But have you noticed, Rory, that most vegans are just massive apologists? And you just go in your local Facebook, vegans in so-and-so city name Facebook group, and it is always just full of massive apologists in there who don't really care so much about the ethical message, and who condone other people committing animal oppression. I think the vegan movement just needs to get its house in order, in all honesty, on this stuff, and just really, really sell the ethical message. Imagine if every vegan in this country actually shared animal slaughterhouse footage instead of just sharing a documentary like What the Health or something, which is effective for the health message. But wouldn't it be more effective if everyone shared like Dominion, for example, or Earthlings? Imagine if every single person in the country was made to watch Dominion. I think that would be more effective than every single person in the country watching Game Changers, for example.
Sure. Yeah. There's, to put it in mathematical terms, perhaps, the overall effect of something is going to be the product of both the actual effect of that thing on an individual multiplied by the number of individuals who partake in that thing, right? And so what you've got to consider is, yeah, Dominion is far more effective per individual than is What the Health.
Yeah.
But is What the Health going to have a comparably or a complementarily higher number of people who are actually willing to watch it? Perhaps it's a mathematical issue that is I don't have the numbers for. But I do agree, like it's number one, it's worrying that there's so few activists. That's the one thing I noticed coming into activism is at first, everyone I met was like a new person. And I was like, oh, cool. Like there's so many activists. And then now I've been an activist for a while now. And it's like, I just see the same people at every single event. Like no matter what the organization is, there's a group of maybe 100 people in the UK who come to everything. And I see them everywhere. And then,
I've been saying this for a while now. You shouldn't be seeing the same. You shouldn't be knowing everyone that you walk across. If the animal rights movement was that big, so I think this is just what's happening here. Because whenever I go to an animal rights protest, as much as I like seeing all these people I know, Rory, I shouldn't be bumping into you at the London Animal Rights March or whatever it is. You should be I should have to go for an absolute sea of people to see you, right? But the fact that I see everyone I know on these marches and stuff, as many people as there are, it's still what is happening here? Why is, hey, Jeff, how you doing? Hey, Laura, hey, Steve, hey, what's going on kind of thing. It's like, no, I should be walking for 10 minutes before I see one single person that I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that, I was also going to agree with the other thing you said, which is that perhaps these data here represent or kind of a result of the dominant messages we give. It's not that animal welfare, animal rights is a less effective message. It's just a less used message. And that does come down to the fact that not many vegans in the grand scheme, or people who kind of identify with vegan, plant-based, whatever it is, are actually going to go out there and give an animal rights or animal welfare centered message. It's going to be, oh, hey, I did it because I you don't want to die of heart disease or whatever.
Yes.
And that's the dominant thing. And then it's like, oh, but also, animals suffer and die, and that's kind of like an added bonus.
Right.
Whereas that should be the real, I guess, plant-based meat and potatoes, the message that we're giving.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think I think vegans have been so-called vegans are doing a bit of a disservice to the movement because they're not promoting the animal rights message strongly enough. The plant and the health and the environment message, as you can see, is working. But I think if more vegans actually shared the animal rights stuff, because that's the thing that actually binds people to never buying these products ever again. The health stuff and the enviro stuff is good for making people do these short-term fads. Oh, damn, I watched, Forks Over Knives the other day, and I think I'm gonna go on a plant-based diet now, and they usually last about 5 months or something, or even less. Whereas the ethics stuff, you watch Dominion and you say, that's it, I'm changing. Those people are much more likely to actually stick to it as well. So that's another thing that's kind of happening here.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there is again just the level of uptake multiplied by the effectiveness of the intervention, I guess. And so few people are willing to watch something like Dominion. My mum actually watched the entirety of it. She's already vegan. She's been vegan for about 3 years. She watched the entirety of Earthlings the other day just by herself. And I don't know anybody else with that level of just brute force, I don't know, willingness to go through it. I watched half of Dominion, and even I was like, I know this stuff already. I'm going to tap out at this point. It's a true one.
Yeah, cool.
Anyway, back to this document. There's what else was there that I wanted to go through? I mean, this is an interesting one. So this is just testament to. It's on the next page down from where we just were. So top left of that page. This is testament to how closely wedded these organizations are. So this is basically the AHDB writing on behalf of the NFU, the National Farmers Union.
Right.
And obviously it makes sense that they kind of work hand in hand because they're both giant organizations for the promotion of animal agriculture generally. But it says the NFU's position is very clear that UK agriculture can meet its commitments without reducing production of meat and dairy, and that even if diets evolve in the UK, there will be scope to export excess production. That's literally saying we are going to produce the same amount, no matter what, not change anything about what we're doing. And if you guys stop eating it, we'll just export it elsewhere. That's it's almost like a climate threat. It's like there's no point in you doing that because we've got markets abroad. And then it says down below that it says the UK's Committee for Climate Change maintains, however, that we need to reduce consumption of beef, lamb, and dairy by 20% by 2050. I mean, that's a pathetic target. I chatted to, as I said, Rob Percival in the podcast recently, and he was saying I can't remember the exact numbers he said now, but it's between like 50 and 80% in order to approach anything sustainable. And the stuff that we are eating, the animal products, do need to be radically differently produced to what they currently are in order to come anywhere close to meeting that. Obviously, there's an ethical dimension to this as well.
But you know what, Rory? It's still even significant that they mentioned this and that they actually gave this figure, even if it's a fifth. We'll need to reduce by a fifth by 2050. That's still significant that they are acknowledging this and they're kind of getting scared about this. And it shows that at least some kind of power that be, whether it's that, who is this? The Climate Committee for Climate Change, that there is actually some kind of pressure. Now, according to you, it's not pressure enough. It's still a pathetic thing. But it's still significant that it was included in this report and Big Ag is getting aware of this.
It is true. Yeah, it's true. And it's almost like with people so embedded in the industry as, for example, people who work in agriculture, Big Ag, NFU, AHDB, the climate argument, this is where the pragmatism about the climate message in animal rights comes in, is if you want them to listen, you actually need to say, hey, people are buying less of this because of the climate and you need to get on board with this and reduce production or whatever. And reducing production isn't enough to end animal slavery, but it at least ends it for a few, and that's better than none. And so that's where the pragmatism about climate comes in, is because people do actually listen to it. And it does get included in this. You'll notice that none of the reports really talk about animal welfare in any substantial way. They just say, oh yeah, if we say high welfare, people will buy it. Or if it looks nice and outdoors, people will buy it. They're not basing any of this on facts about how production happens. They're basing on how people perceive it. And people perceive climate in a far more effective way than they perceive animal welfare, or especially animal rights, rightly or wrongly. In the bottom right of this same page then, so there's the bottom rightmost paragraph. It says, in the UK, the majority of people do not see farming as one of the most influential negative contributors to the environment. They rank heavy industry, air travel, waste disposal, energy production. Farming is ranked almost last as the most negative. So in other words, farming is seen as like the best industry for the environment.
Oh my God.
There are exceptions to this. And people who have adopted exclusionary diets, again, such as vegans and vegetarians, are twice as likely to put farming as their top concern. So this is a little shout out to us lot in the corner, just yelling, this isn't good. It's nice to...
Are people in the UK seriously not still aware of how environmentally damaging animal agriculture is? Is that... Did I really just read that? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, so you can see that in the graph on the right of that on the left of that paragraph.
Yeah.
And you can see, so there's two columns. The first one is the percentage of people who are concerned about the effects of farming on the environment. 18% are very positive, so they're not concerned at all. And 44% are neither nor, so they just don't know. If you add those together, you get 62% of people are either positive or neutral, and then 32%, 1 in 3, are like somewhat negative. That's somewhat or very negative, actually. They put those together, and then 6% don't know. So about 2/3 of people just aren't bothered at all. And then the next column is the overall view of impact. The overall view of the impact that farming has on the environment in the UK. And again, people are either positive or they're neither nor. 72% this time, just either think it's great or don't care. People really are so uneducated about, and this isn't their fault. It's not me saying, "Oh, you're so uneducated." It's literally just there's no information. They're not reached with science. Like scientists are working hard on this and figuring out plant-based solutions to agriculture and rewilding and whatever else. And people have no idea.
Yeah.
The dominant voices in this space are the NFU, the media, the government, meat corporations, their PR departments. That is where people get their information from. They get their information really from supermarket aisles, and we saw that in the first report when it came up with that, like the perfect aisle for people. That was literally, it's like this experience. You walk down, and all the information you have about animal agriculture really is handed to you, almost literally on a plate before it even gets to your plate. It's green. There's nice photos about food, how to cook it. It's made outside. It's got B12 in it, and that's literally everything you need. And it's British as well.
There you go.
That's all people know, and that is actually, funnily enough, that is almost exactly what people will say to you when you then do outreach with them on the streets. They are unwittingly, they're becoming mouthpieces for the marketing departments of meat industries.
Yeah,
it's genius.
Absolutely. No, they've what's that quote? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he didn't exist, or something. It's like they're getting people to be their own mouthpieces and acting like they aren't even propagating this almost at all. It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. The rest of this report, there's only one other little thing that I found kind of funny, is that the majority of consumers, this is on page 8, under consumer actions. It says the majority of consumers are personally taking some actions to help with the environment. Most common is recycling, with 2/3 recycling regularly. I mean, if you look at the graphs of the things you can do to prevent climate change, for example, the top 3 are always don't have kids, or have like one fewer kid or whatever. Don't fly, don't eat animal products. Those are like always the 3 things at the top. And also, depending on how much you drive, like drive less. Recycle. If you look at bar charts of those things, recycling is like 1% of the impact of going plant-based or not flying or not having kids. Not having kids is always the number 1, actually, because obviously there's a exponential number of humans that could then possibly exist and have their own carbon footprints after you yourself. But 2/3 of people recycle regularly, and that's the action that they take. And 9% more would consider it in future, meaning actually 1 in 4 people in the UK, if you add those two together, 1 in 4 people just wouldn't consider recycling. Even that's the most basic action possible. And this is, it beggars belief, to be honest.
Now, Rory, it says here a little graph of what people's concerns were for being the drivers of believing animal farming is damaging to the environment, which we know it is. And it puts these in order here. So, like, methane from livestock, too much land for animal farming, blah, blah, blah. Do you know what the actual, like, order actually is of these things? What are the most... Because for me, I think deforestation would probably be the top one, maybe even above methane, because of the amount of rainforest cut down for soy feed and stuff and grazing land for farmed animals. That would, I think, actually be the top most destructive thing from animal agriculture. But I could be wrong. What are you saying that it is?
Yeah, I'd say when you mention like plant-based, particularly, people talk about soy and they talk about deforestation, and also like palm oil, for example. That could come under too much land for animal farming. That might be like included as a subset of that, because if you need land, you need to take whatever is currently off the land, chop down forests and use that land. So it might be that is what deforestation is.
Right.
But yeah, it could also be that people perhaps, because this is about it's not necessarily just about animal farming, actually, is it? So
maybe just as farming.
That's what I'd say. I would think it would be included in too much land use, but I can't actually say for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
That is. I mean, the only other thing is then on the next page down, dietary change. It says, in the form of eating less meat and dairy, comes lower down in the rank order of actions that consumers would take to help the environment, although around 1 in 3 feel like they're already eating less meat and 17% think they're eating less dairy. And you can see in the bar graphs below those, people are 68% of recycling. People are buying food loose without plastic packaging. They're minimizing water use, energy use, getting local rather than imported food. Again, that's like the buy British, back British farming. Green energy, traveling less by plane, but that was during the COVID pandemic. Realistically, people aren't traveling any less by plane than they were previously nowadays. Eating less meat is all the way down there. and eating less dairy right at the bottom. So even if the environmental message is really strong for helping people to realize they probably shouldn't be eating as many animals as they do, it's still weak in comparison to all the other environmental actions they can take. And so this is probably where you're right in terms of saying we shouldn't be pushing the environmental message so much. We should be pushing animal rights.
Right.
Is because if you push the environmental message, people just be like, well, sure, you're right, but what if I just like recycle more instead of not eating animals? So that's the risk.
That's the thing. There's ways to kind of mitigate, kind of offset your environmental footprint that actually in some way doesn't eliminate animal. Like for example, I do think, for example, this could be controversial here, but I think a non-vegan who doesn't have kids yet who is eating meat and dairy and whatever, it could be argued that they cause less damage to the environment than a vegan who does a few of these things, maybe flies or whatever, and has kids. So there's ways you can mitigate and offset certain things about when we're talking about environmental issues. But when it comes to ethics, you just can't. You can't say, well, I'm not slitting children's throats, therefore I can counter this by slitting animals' throats. It's like, well, no, that doesn't work. That's like, you're not offsetting anything there, really.
Exactly.
But with the environment, there kind of is a way to sort of do that in comparison to everyone else.
For sure. And I do think it is a hard one, because for me, take like the Australian bushfires of last year or so. There was this story that ran where like 1 billion animals died in Australian bushfires.
Wow.
And that's pretty atrocious, right? For those animals, like burning to death is an awful way to die, and comparable, say, to like the gas chambers, for example, that we use in pig farms in the UK. And if we believe that those gas chambers in pig farms are wrong, then also if the wildfire is, I mean, the wildfires are natural in many parts of the world, but the intensity and frequency of them is unnatural, and that is driven by climate change, and that is human induced. Then there is some level of human culpability, even if, say, it's just like you had a couple of kids and you took a few flights and whatever. The more that you do to worsen the environment, the more that the blood of the animals that died in bushfires and whatever is on your hands. Right. And that's not me saying if you fly, you're not vegan at all. That would be a ridiculous thing to say. But that's saying that this is where my environmental concerns come in, is that actually animals are dying, and also humans dying, because of climate change, and it is an urgent thing, and actually it is an ethical issue. It's not like there's environment and then there's ethics, and it's two different things. It's like, actually, these are one and the same, and what we're doing to the environment does kill animals and will continue to kill animals, and therefore the same logic begets both veganism and environmentalism. So that's where it comes to from me. But it's obviously the slitting the throats of children, lambs and pigs and whatever else, is a significantly more direct thing that you can have significantly more control over, and also is more of an absolute measure. You can say, I ate 0 animals this year, and that's great. You can never say, I caused 0 emissions this year, and therefore none of the plight of koalas in Australian bushfires is on my hands, because no matter what you do, you're going to cause some emissions. So it's less of an absolute scale and more of a relative scale. And so doing what you can is fantastic. If you just stop at recycling, that's probably, there's no point. But anyway, that's my diatribe on environmental issues and ethics.
No, that's good. Yeah, thanks for that, Rory. All right. Well, I guess now that we've covered that article, we'll come towards the end of the stream and we'll just very briefly cover a few of these pages now. So, for example, this one about sleepwalking I found interesting. So I'll just go to this. I
haven't seen this.
Well, latest AHDV report finds consumers are sleepwalking away from eating meat. So this is where they're saying a lack of inspiration rather than conscious reaction to trends such as veganism trends was the heart of the pre-COVID-19 reduction in meat, fish and poultry consumption, new AHDV research has suggested. So they're linking here the COVID stuff and what was happening with COVID and all the media coverage of that. They're linking that. This kind of ties into what we said earlier about them kind of walking away from meat, but I'm not sure exactly the reasons that they're giving. Because that would seem to kind of conflict with what we read earlier about COVID-19 led to less negative coverage of meat, and so they were.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I do wonder if I mean, obviously, I've not seen this. I've not analysed it in any detail.
Yeah.
But I kind of wonder if this is potentially like a spin to appease the meat industry to a certain extent of saying, oh no, people aren't leaving you because they don't like you. They're just leaving you because they don't realise how great you are. And so if you give them more inspiration, then more recipe ideas, then they'll come back to you. And it is like psychologically true, and from a marketing perspective, that kind of inspiration, the really nice looking recipes and everything in the aisles, does good things for the sales of meat, at least good from a financial perspective.
Yeah.
But
I think, yeah. And I think this article, looking at it, actually, it kind of goes into that. I think the first document that we read, actually, Rory, kind of covers everything here that we've read, maybe in greater detail, or the document. So I think we've already read kind of, this is just maybe just like a summation of these things. So it's not that important. I just found it interesting that they're saying this, just for a bit of intel here. They're sleepwalking away from eating meat. And then the other one I just briefly wanted to gloss over. Cheesemakers feeling the squeeze, says new Kite report.
Oh, this is recent as well. This is just like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, so this is caused by, so they're saying weak demand caused by inflationary price increases, expensive stocks resulting from record high milk prices. So basically, it's not just the case for the dairy industry that people are going away from their industry because vegans are sharing more messages and stuff about it, but I think it's getting pricier in shops as well. And that could be another reason why some people are just buying less dairy now, especially I think the younger generations, like the students and stuff like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it with the cost of living crisis that whenever there was an article saying like inflation hits new highs and whatever over the last like year or two, I always check it, and always the food, whenever it's about food, the foods that are most affected are always like eggs and dairy, and meat to an extent as well. But it's always these foods. And I think, and I'm not an economist, I'm not like an agricultural expert or anything, but I believe the reason for that to be that there's not only the cost of, I guess, I've just seen it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading a super chat that Jack is wanting me to flash up on the screen. Thank you for the donation, Jack. Says, I'm vegan for health and environment. I saw a puppy farm burning down, and all I could think about was the environment and my health if I breathed smoking. Yeah, so that was alluding to the whole enviro and ethics message. Sorry, carry on, Rory.
What was I even saying? Something about puppy farms?
No, we were talking about prices of dairy and stuff.
Oh yeah, of course. So there's not only the cost of like the animals themselves, but which kind of the inflation with regards to that stage of the process of raising animals, but also if you're looking at the crops you then feed to the animals, those are also going to be affected by inflation. There's basically a longer chain, there's a longer supply chain, all of which is increasing in accordance with inflation, and therefore things like cheese become the most affected and the most expensive, I guess.
Yeah,
that's my theory anyway. But again, like anybody who understands economics better than I do, please do correct me. That's kind of how I rationalize the disproportionate impact. But that is a good thing because we've seen over cost of living, more people do move towards more plant-based recipes. But it's all whole foods plant-based, and that means that you get these news articles saying the stock of Beyond Burger has dropped massively. Well, yeah, of course, because they're quite an expensive product. People spin it as saying there are fewer vegans and veganism's doing less well. Actually, if you look at any kind of standard plant-based products like lentils or chickpeas or whatever else, they're doing as well, if not better than ever, because people are moving towards cheap recipes which are whole foods and which are plant-based. So it all ties in.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Rory. And yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything here. I just want to show a page of interest for people who want to go to this website. So there's like a tags thing you can select at the bottom of a lot of the pages, or you can actually just put this in the URL. So ahdb.org.uk/tags/vegan, and you can see all the stuff they've got on their website here that talks about veganism that could be interesting. So this is just an interesting page for anyone who wants to visit the website. I'll put the links in the stream afterwards in the about section. But yeah, look, Rory, I want to thank you for your time today. I think we've covered some really interesting stuff there, some insightful stuff about meat industry, dairy industry tactics, how they're going to be employing these things in shops and how they're aiming like their propaganda at consumers and stuff. So,
well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a very interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it very much so. I hope the audience have gotten some top tips out of it as to how to sell more meat.
That's it. Yeah, there we go. So
That's
yeah,
what we're here for.
it was absolutely. So yeah, we're just meat industry shills, obviously, in disguise. Obviously, that's no,
I knew all that.
the NWO. So yeah, no, thanks, Rory, and I really appreciate bringing all your expertise to the stream and all the little useful tidbits you had about every page and stuff. So I want to thank you very much for that. And yeah, peeps, be sure to share this stream if you found the stuff in it insightful and interesting. We think there's some very important stuff in here that needs exposing and revealing, and we'll be seeing a lot of this stuff soon in supermarkets. And it's also going to be important for improving our advocacy, like the very important stuff about the whole B12 stuff and all that we looked at earlier. So please do get talking about this, get sharing the tactics and stuff from this site. And yeah, we'll see you again soon. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you very much.